Good evening and welcome back. Tonight we are stepping into a decade that history has quietly agreed to remember through rose-colored glasses, the 1950s. Picture it the way the postcards want you to. Gleaming kitchens, cheerful housewives, chrome bumpers catching the sunset, a milkshake shared between two teenagers who will apparently be married by next spring. It looks from a distance like the last decade America ever got completely right. Now step a little closer, because the picture does not hold up under a closer look. Underneath that gleaming surface was a decade quietly running on lead, nicotine, fear, and an enormous amount of pretending. Before we sink into it, thank you to everyone who requested this topic in the comments. I read every single one of them, and tonight's journey exists because enough of you asked for it. If you enjoy drifting off to these long, slow walks through history, feel free to subscribe, though only if it genuinely appeals to you. No pressure whatsoever. Tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight, and what time your clock is currently showing, because it always seems to be somewhere around 2 a.m. no matter where you are. We are also on Spotify now, so if your eyes would rather stay closed while your ears do the listening, you will find the link waiting in the description below. And if you would like a little more comfort on these sleepless nights, channel membership is now open, giving you access to several uninterrupted hours of ad-free video built specifically for drifting off. So dim the lights, let a fan hum somewhere in the background, sink into the blankets, and get comfortable, because we are about to spend a long, slow evening inside a decade that worked very hard to look perfect. Let's sit with a question for a moment before we begin. Was the 1950s truly the golden age everyone remembers, or was it a beautifully decorated illusion propped up by cigarettes, casseroles, and quiet desperation? Could you have survived a single week in a house slowly leaching lead and asbestos into the air you breathe? Could you have swallowed a doctor's confident advice to smoke a little more to calm your nerves? Could you have smiled through an entire day dressed in a girdle tight enough to rearrange your internal organs? We are about to find out together. Congratulations, you have just woken up in 1954. Somewhere down the hall, a percolator is groaning to life. Your walls are quietly shedding fibers nobody has warned you about, and the clock radio beside your bed is roughly the size and weight of a toaster oven. Good luck to you. You are going to need it. Let's begin the way any ordinary day begins, with waking up inside your brand new suburban home. It is one of thousands of nearly identical houses stamped out across the countryside like cookies from the same mold. And paradise, it turns out, is a modest two-bedroom box surrounded by 100 other modest two-bedroom boxes. Your half-asleep neighbor has already wandered into the wrong driveway twice this month, because from a certain angle every house on the block looks exactly the same. The walls around you are packed with asbestos insulation. The paint coating every surface is rich, creamy, and quietly loaded with lead. The ceiling tiles above your head are patiently waiting to cause somebody a great deal of trouble in about 4 decades. But it is new, it is modern, and technically it belongs to you, or at least it will, somewhere around the year 1984 once the mortgage is finally paid off. You stretch, you yawn, and you take a long, deep breath of freshly off-gassing everything. Welcome to the dream. Let's linger on that dream a little longer, because it appeared with startling speed. Entire neighborhoods rose out of empty fields in a matter of months, built on assembly lines the way a factory builds refrigerators. Same floor plan, same cramped kitchen, same strip of lawn out front that you are somehow both legally and socially required to keep greener than the neighbors. On paper, the idea is genuinely lovely. A home of your own, a fresh start, a small slice of a good life. In practice, you now live in a house so identical to 50 others nearby that your own children will occasionally wander into a stranger's kitchen and sit down for breakfast before anyone notices the mistake. And then there is the small matter of what exactly this house is made from. The insulation wrapped snugly around your family is asbestos, a genuinely remarkable material, fireproof, inexpensive, and extremely talented at causing problems that will not send you a bill for another 30 or 40 years. The paint on the walls contains lead, so when your toddler gnaws on the windowsill, they are technically having a small, toxic snack. The pipes carrying your morning water may be lined with lead as well, gently seasoning your coffee before you have even had a sip. You are living inside a beautifully decorated hazard, and the truly remarkable part is that almost nobody involved has any idea, because the people building and selling these homes genuinely believe they are handing you progress. The heating situation is its own small adventure. On a good day, a furnace clangs and groans somewhere beneath the floor like a ship coming back to life. On a less fortunate day, the house has roughly the insulating power of a paper grocery bag, and winter mornings arrive with a chill that settles directly into your bones. You lie there under the blankets running the ancient human calculation of exactly how cold that floor is going to be versus exactly how badly you need to get up anyway. The answer is always the same. You need to get up, and the floor is always freezing. Outside your window, the neighborhood hums along with a very particular kind of forced cheerfulness. Everyone waves. Everyone smiles. Everyone keeps the curtains at precisely the correct level of respectable openness. There is enormous unspoken pressure to appear happy, settled, and thoroughly successful at all times, which is an exhausting performance to begin roughly 90 seconds after opening your eyes. Try projecting effortless contentment before your first sip of coffee. The entire decade expects exactly that of you every single morning. So you swing your legs out from under the covers, brace yourself for that cold floor, and take your first full breath of your brand new, chemically enhanced home. The dream is technically all around you, humming with modern promise while quietly shedding particles you would really rather not think too hard about. It is a beautiful morning, in a beautiful house, wrapped around a beautiful lie. And now that you are upright, it is time to become presentable, which, if you happen to be the woman of this house, is an undertaking of genuinely heroic proportions. Getting ready is a full production, and if you are a woman, it comes with a very tight opening act. One that must be finished before your husband lays eyes on you, before the children see you, and frankly before anyone at all sees you. You are expected to look effortlessly perfect, which of course demands an extraordinary amount of effort. You smooth cold cream across your face, wrestle your hair into curlers hard enough to double as small weapons, and coat the entire arrangement in a cloud of hairspray thick enough to hold up a roof. A number of these beauty products contain ingredients that would raise eyebrows in a modern pharmacy. Your deodorant may be doing something faintly unsettling to your skin, and your face powder has a history nobody talks about anymore. But the magazines are firm on this point. A good wife greets her morning looking as though she stepped straight out of an advertisement, even if that advertisement was slowly poisoning her one application at a time. Let's start with the hair, because the hair is nothing short of a lifestyle commitment. Overnight, you have slept, if it can even be called sleep, on a head full of hard plastic and metal rollers, each one clamped down tight enough to produce strange dreams and a mild headache by morning. You wake up looking as though you lost a brief but decisive argument with a small appliance. Then comes the ritual of setting it all into place, teasing, shaping, locking everything down with a hairspray so aggressive it forms something closer to a helmet than a hairstyle. The fumes fill the small bathroom and you breathe every bit of it in without a second thought, and the finished result is rigid enough to survive a minor collision without moving. Then comes the face. Cold cream, foundation, powder, rouge, lipstick, one product after another in a small assembly line. The goal is to look entirely natural, radiant, untouched by human effort, which of course requires a truly staggering amount of human effort to achieve. It is the great con of the era. A woman is expected to appear as though she simply rolled out of bed looking flawless, when in reality she has spent the better part of an hour constructing that illusion from the ground up like a tiny, dedicated cosmetic contractor. The products themselves are something of a rogues gallery. Certain face creams of the era contain ingredients that would make a modern chemist quietly take the jar out of your hands. Some skin treatments and cosmetics carry substances that are gently harmful, tucked inside pretty pink packaging and cheerful promises of youth. Your perfume, your face powder, your setting spray, All of it was formulated in an era where the phrase safety testing functioned more as a polite suggestion than an actual rule. And here is the part that genuinely stings. None of this is optional. It is expected. Stepping outside without your face properly done invites comment, concern, and the quiet suggestion that you have let yourself go, which in the language of the 1950s is roughly equivalent to committing a minor social offense. Even inside your own home, you are expected to remain presentable at all times, because a husband should never be forced to look upon an unvarnished wife over his morning eggs. Imagine being required to look camera-ready before you are even fully conscious. So you finish that last careful dab of lipstick, check yourself once in the mirror, and there she is. The perfect woman, composed, radiant, and quietly, mildly toxic. You have transformed exhaustion into elegance through nothing but sheer willpower and questionable chemistry. It is a small triumph of appearance over comfort, and you will get to repeat this exact performance again tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, indefinitely. But there is no time to admire the finished work, because the rest of the family is stirring, the kitchen is calling, and something even more dangerous than the hairspray is waiting for you downstairs. Breakfast. Breakfast in the 1950s is less a meal and more a small science experiment sponsored generously by the advertising industry. You pour a bowl of cereal engineered to contain roughly the same nutritional value as the cardboard box it arrived in, drown it in whole milk, and dust the whole thing with sugar because sugar has quietly become its own food group. There is toast, there is bacon crackling in yesterday's grease, and there is coffee brewed strong enough to strip the varnish off a table. And to round off this balanced morning, the single most important item on the plate, a cigarette. Everyone smokes. You smoke, your spouse smokes, and if the advertisements are to be believed, your family doctor would happily light one up right alongside you. Breakfast does not so much nourish you as prepare you for a long day of slow, stylish self-harm. Let's look more closely at that cereal, because it is a genuine marvel of modern marketing. Bright colors, cheerful cartoon mascots, and a sugar content that would give any dentist a nervous twitch. Children are the primary target of this entire industry, and the marketing men have figured out that if you slap a cartoon animal on the box and tuck a small plastic toy inside, a child will scream for it in the grocery aisle until the parent surrenders. Nutrition is very much an afterthought. The cereal is essentially candy wearing a thin disguise, and everyone eats it by the bowlful while the television insists it is part of a complete breakfast, which is technically true in roughly the same way a life raft is part of a complete ocean voyage. Then there is the rest of the spread. Bacon popping in the pan, eggs fried in whatever grease is left over from yesterday, white toast slathered in butter, and a generous scrape of jam. Portions are hearty, fat is openly celebrated, and the concept of cholesterol has not yet arrived to spoil anyone's morning. It is delicious. It is heavy. It lands in your stomach like a warm brick, and you will feel it for hours, which is convenient because you have hours of hard work ahead of you regardless. The coffee deserves its own mention entirely. It has been percolated, meaning boiled and reboiled until it achieves a flavor best described as assertive. You drink it black or drowned in cream, and either way it is strong enough to wake the dead and mildly annoy them once they're up. This is the fuel running the entire decade. A nation quietly powered by caffeine, nicotine, and the firm, unshaken belief that everything is going wonderfully. And now, the grand finale of the meal, the cigarette. In the 1950s, lighting up after breakfast is not a guilty little habit. It is a civilized ritual, as ordinary as brushing your teeth and considerably more popular. You light up right at the table, smoke curling lazily over the toast, and nobody so much as flinches, because everyone at the table is doing the exact same thing. The advertising men have done their work beautifully. Cigarettes are marketed as smooth, refreshing, even soothing to a sore throat, which is a bit like advertising a bear as an emotional support animal. The truly remarkable part is how thoroughly smoke is woven into absolutely everything. It is present at breakfast, at the office, at dinner, in the maternity ward, and glowing warmly on the television screen. A pregnant woman lighting a cigarette earns nothing more than a shrug. An Olympic athlete endorsing a brand earns a healthy paycheck. The notion that any of this might eventually become a serious problem is out there somewhere in the future, patiently waiting with a filing cabinet of medical studies and an extraordinarily large lawsuit. So you finish your coffee, stub the cigarette out in the ashtray that lives permanently on the kitchen table, and rise from a breakfast that has technically both fed you and quietly begun the long, slow work of undoing you. You are caffeinated, you are full, and you are lightly cured in smoke. Now it is time to get dressed, and if breakfast felt uncomfortable, the clothing closet is about to raise the stakes considerably. Getting dressed in the 1950s might reasonably be reclassified as a mild, government-approved form of torture. If you are a woman, comfort simply is not on the menu today, or any day. First comes the girdle, an elastic garment engineered to compress your internal organs into a more socially acceptable arrangement. Then come the stockings, held aloft by a contraption featuring more clips and straps than a parachute harness. Add to that a bra with the structural ambitions of a small suspension bridge, a dress cut tight enough to prevent a full, satisfying exhale, and a pair of heels for good measure. Men, you are not exempt from suffering either. You are handed a heavy wool suit, a tie knotted tight enough to double as a warning label, and a hat that is entirely mandatory whether you personally enjoy hats or not. By the time you are fully dressed, you are technically ready to face the day, provided the day does not require you to sit, bend, or breathe particularly deeply at any point. Let's pause on the girdle, because it genuinely deserves a moment of respectful silence. This is a garment constructed from heavy elastic and quiet, ongoing suffering, engineered to smooth, flatten, and rearrange the human body into a shape approved by the fashion magazines. Getting into one is, in itself, a small workout. You wiggle, you tug, you hold your breath and offer a brief silent prayer, and eventually you are sealed inside a rubbery tube that keeps everything firmly in place, including your own lungs, which now operate at a noticeably reduced capacity for the remainder of the day. Sitting down becomes a delicate negotiation. Bending over is simply out of the question. You will spend your entire day held rigidly upright, not out of impeccable posture, but because the alternative is physically impossible in this particular garment. The stockings present their own special brand of challenge. There is no forgiving, stretchy fabric here, only delicate nylon that runs the very instant you glance at it wrong, held up by a garter belt featuring a genuinely bewildering system of clips and straps. One wrong movement and a clip pops loose, sending a stocking sagging dramatically down your leg in the middle of the grocery store. It functions like an extremely expensive, extremely fragile and mildly passive-aggressive parachute harness, except instead of saving your life in an emergency, it simply ruins your entire afternoon. Then, finally, the shoes. Heels, naturally, because a proper lady is expected to reach a certain height and to suffer gracefully for the privilege. You will stand in them for hours at a stretch, in the kitchen, at the market, throughout the entire house, balancing carefully on the balls of your feet while maintaining a pleasant smile the whole time. Ever attempted to mop a kitchen floor in high heels? Women of the 1950s did this routinely, and their feet filed a formal, aching complaint every single night without fail. Men, do not imagine yourselves let off easy, because your outfit constitutes its own quiet prison. The suit is mandatory, the tie is knotted snugly against the throat, and the entire ensemble is worn faithfully in every kind of weather with a kind of stoic determination. In the height of summer, you roast quietly beneath layers of heavy wool while insisting, unconvincingly, that you are perfectly comfortable, and the hat is never optional. A respectable man simply does not leave his house bareheaded, because an uncovered head is considered somehow both undignified and faintly suspicious. You are, in every practical sense, wearing a uniform, and the uniform reads respectable, sweaty, and thoroughly conforming. Underneath the whole arrangement runs one simple, unspoken rule. Appearance is everything, and comfort is a small price to pay for looking correct. This clothing was never designed with your actual body or your actual day in mind. It was designed for the photograph, for the impression, for the watching neighbors. You are quite literally a walking advertisement for a well-ordered life, and advertisements are never permitted to slouch. So you fasten the final button, adjust the last uncooperative strap, and stand there fully assembled, compressed, cinched, and buttoned within an inch of your life. You look, by every 1950s standard, magnificent. You can also barely draw a full breath. You are, in short, ready to face a full day of demanding domestic labor while dressed as though you are attending a formal luncheon. And speaking of things that are absolutely everywhere and slowly, quietly harming you, let's return to that cheerful companion you lit up back at breakfast, because the cigarette truly deserves a much closer look before we move any further into this day. In the 1950s, smoke does not stay politely confined to the breakfast table. You will smoke at your office desk, on the airplane, in the hospital waiting room while anxiously awaiting news about your persistent cough. Restaurants sit permanently hazy, offices are hazy, and living rooms carry a permanent gray fog hovering near the ceiling like a small, private indoor weather system. Cigarettes are marketed as relaxing, as sophisticated, even as gently good for a sore throat, a phrase that genuinely should never have been allowed into print. Pregnant women smoke freely. Star athletes cheerfully endorse cigarette brands. Beloved cartoon characters happily light up mid-adventure on Saturday morning television. Almost nobody is especially concerned, because the possibility that any of this might eventually become a problem sits a couple of decades and a great many lawsuits away from anyone's present-day worries. Consider, for a moment, just how total this smoke really is. There is nowhere it does not reach. You light up at your office desk and tap the ash into a tray built directly into the furniture. You board an airplane, settle into your assigned seat, and immediately fill the sealed metal cabin with smoke alongside dozens of strangers doing precisely the same thing at the same time. You go to the movies and squint politely through the haze drifting across the projector beam. You visit your doctor's office and find an ashtray waiting in the lobby, quite possibly on the doctor's own desk. Trying to locate a genuinely clean breath of air anywhere in the 1950s feels a bit like trying to find a quiet corner inside a fireworks display. The marketing itself is where the whole arrangement becomes genuinely surreal. Cigarettes are not sold as a vice at all. They are sold as something closer to a virtue. They are refreshing. They are smooth. They soothe a scratchy throat, which remains a genuinely astonishing claim to make about the act of setting a small fire in your own mouth and inhaling the result. Certain brands wrap themselves deliberately in the comforting language of health, suggesting they are gentler, cleaner, kinder to the body, as though the real trouble with the competing brands was simply a lack of good manners. It stands as one of the great marketing performances in modern history, successfully convincing an entire population that the very thing making them cough was somehow helping them. And then there are the endorsements, which have aged about as gracefully as unrefrigerated milk. Doctors appear directly in cigarette advertisements, personally recommending their favorite brand and lending the whole enterprise a comforting air of medical approval. Athletes at the very peak of physical condition cheerfully promote the exact product quietly working against them. Movie stars glamorize it on screen. Radio hosts encourage it between songs. And even beloved animated characters pause mid-episode to enjoy a leisurely smoke. Try imagining a friendly cartoon animal today stopping an episode to light a cigarette. The 1950s looked at exactly that scenario and saw absolutely nothing strange about it. Perhaps the most jarring detail of all is simply who is smoking. Everyone. Expectant mothers light up without a flicker of concern, because the warnings simply do not exist yet in any meaningful form. Teenagers puff away, nervously trying to appear older than they are. Grandparents have been at it faithfully for 50 years and consider the habit something close to a personality trait. Smoking crosses every age group, every social class, every situation imaginable, forming one single, shared national activity that quietly binds the entire country together in a warm, carcinogenic embrace. The knowledge that something might genuinely be wrong is already out there, gathering slowly in the background. A handful of researchers are beginning to raise their hands and clear their throats, sometimes quite literally. But the momentum of the entire surrounding culture points firmly in the opposite direction, propelled by advertising money and the simple, stubborn fact that nearly everyone is already hooked. The reckoning is coming. It is simply not here yet, and until it finally arrives, the smoke keeps rolling steadily onward. So you finish your cigarette. Light the next one directly off the end of it because that counts as basic efficiency, and carry on with your beautifully hazy morning. The entire world appears to be doing exactly the same thing right alongside you, cheerful and blissfully unaware, wrapped together in a fog everyone has quietly agreed is perfectly fine. Now, speaking of people expected to keep going no matter what life throws at them, let's follow the woman of the house into a workday that genuinely never seems to end. Her schedule alone would break a modern productivity app in half. She is expected to cook every single meal entirely from scratch, keep the home spotless from corner to corner, raise the children, manage the household budget down to the penny, remain glamorous at every hour of the day, and greet her husband at the front door each evening with a warm smile and a fresh drink, as though she has spent her day gently relaxing rather than single-handedly running a small, unpaid hotel. The magazines and the television programs insist this arrangement is joyful and entirely natural, that the truly fulfilled woman finds deep, genuine satisfaction in waxing a hallway floor. There is no sick day available to her. There is no clocking out, and there is certainly no thank you waiting at the end of it. If she happens to feel exhausted, or trapped, or quietly miserable, the surrounding culture already has an answer prepared. And that answer usually involves the gentle suggestion that she simply try a little harder and smile a little wider. Let's walk carefully through her day, because the schedule truly is relentless from the very first minute. She is up and dressed before anyone else in the house, pulling herself together in the dark, then moving straight into the kitchen to produce a full breakfast for the entire family. The instant the plates are cleared away, she is packing lunches, wiping small faces clean, and ushering both children and husband firmly out the front door. And then, with the house finally quiet around her, does she rest for even a moment? She does not. The real work of her day is only just beginning. There is the laundry, which in the 1950s amounts to a genuine physical ordeal. Sorting each garment, soaking it, wrestling soaking wet clothes through a mechanical wringer, hanging every last piece out to dry, then ironing the whole pile into crisp, obedient submission. There is the cleaning, which never truly stops, because a spotless home is treated as visible, undeniable proof of a woman's personal worth. Floors are scrubbed and waxed by hand, every surface is dusted, and the entire house is polished to a shine that must somehow be maintained daily against the relentless, ongoing assault of a family that insists on actually living in it. Then there is the cooking, effectively a full-time job quietly hiding inside another full-time job. Every single meal is planned, shopped for, prepared from raw ingredients, served, and cleaned up after. 3 separate times a day, every day of the week, with no weekends off and absolutely no built-in break. She also serves as the family's unofficial accountant, stretching a single income across a mountain of monthly bills, and she remains the primary parent throughout, handling every scraped knee, every tantrum, every endless stream of small questions, and the general daily chaos of raising small humans, all while somehow appearing calm and entirely put together. Because that is the other unspoken requirement, the one that quietly turns a genuinely hard job into something close to an impossible one. She must look wonderful throughout the entire ordeal. Hair carefully done, dress neatly pressed, makeup freshly applied, a warm and genuine-looking smile ready at every hour of the day. The magazines of the era are remarkably specific on this exact point. She is expected to have dinner fully ready, the children clean and quiet, and herself freshened up and cheerful the very moment her husband finally walks through the front door, so that he arrives home to a peaceful haven rather than the true scene of a small domestic war he narrowly managed to avoid witnessing. And what, in the end, does she receive in exchange for all of this labor? Not a paycheck, not a promotion. In most households, not even a genuine word of thanks, because the work itself is considered so entirely natural to her role that acknowledging it out loud would feel strange, rather like formally thanking the sun for rising each morning. The surrounding culture insists this is her true purpose and her deepest source of joy, and that any woman who happens to feel otherwise is the one carrying the actual problem. So the exhaustion goes largely unspoken. So does the boredom, the isolation, the quiet, creeping sense of being a staff of exactly one, running an operation that never once closes its doors. All of it stays neatly hidden behind the smile, because complaining is considered deeply unbecoming, and the neighbors, as always, are watching closely. It is a job carrying infinite responsibility, zero pay, and one mandatory, unwavering grin. She keeps the entire household machine running quietly in the background, invisible and utterly essential, functioning as the true load-bearing wall of this whole shining decade. Now that we have seen just how much of the household's daily labor falls squarely on her shoulders, let's meet the machines that were supposedly invented to make her life easier, and which mostly just discovered brand new and creative ways to injure her instead. The labor-saving appliances of the 1950s are marketed enthusiastically as your new best friends, and they occasionally behave more like quietly hostile enemies. The washing machine comes equipped with a wringer, two tightly spinning rollers designed to squeeze the water out of wet clothing, and if you are not exceedingly careful, out of your fingers, your hand, and potentially your entire forearm as well. The stove and oven run on temperamental gas lines with almost no safety features built in whatsoever. The vacuum cleaner weighs roughly as much as a small child and roars to life like a genuinely angry mechanical animal. Every single one of these devices promises to liberate you from domestic drudgery, and every single one of them arrives with its own fresh, exciting method for causing an injury. Progress in the 1950s shows up gleaming, chrome-plated, and very slightly out to get you. Let's begin with the washing machine, the undisputed reigning champion of household danger. Perched on top of many models sit two rollers known collectively as a wringer, through which you feed soaking wet clothes to squeeze out the excess water before hanging them to dry. In theory, this is a genuinely brilliant labor-saving idea. In practice, the wringer does not know the difference between a wet cotton shirt and a wet human hand, and it will happily pull whatever you offer it steadily inward with cheerful, tireless mechanical enthusiasm. Get a sleeve caught, or a finger, or even a stray lock of hair, and the machine will contentedly continue drawing you further in like a very slow, very persistent predator. Injuries from these wringers were common enough across the decade to earn their own grim household nickname. It remains, quite possibly, the only laundry appliance in history that could genuinely be described as an active threat to the person operating it. The stove comes next, running on gas with a casual attitude toward safety that would thoroughly horrify any modern building inspector. There is no automatic shutoff valve if the flame happens to go out on its own, meaning a quietly extinguished burner can slowly fill your entire kitchen with gas while you carry on about your business, blissfully unaware that your home has just become mildly explosive. Lighting the stove each morning is a small, quiet act of faith involving a lit match and a fair amount of hope. You lean in close, you strike the match, and within a fraction of a second you discover whether today will be an entirely ordinary day or a singed eyebrows kind of day. The vacuum cleaner sounds harmless enough right up until the moment you actually try to lift it. These machines are heavy, solidly built contraptions constructed like small tanks on wheels, and hauling one up a flight of stairs qualifies as a genuine athletic event in its own right. It roars to life with a sound not unlike an aircraft taking off, rattling the windows throughout the entire house, and it becomes your daily companion in an endless, ongoing battle against household dust. Modern vacuums glide smoothly across a floor. This one lumbers forward with grim determination. Operating it feels less like light housework and more like walking a large, extremely loud, mildly angry pet that has only ever learned to move in one direction, forward. And these, remember, are simply the appliances working exactly as intended. The wiring hidden behind the walls is an entirely separate concern. Homes of this era are frequently under-equipped to handle the sudden flood of new electric gadgets everyone is rushing out to buy. So outlets become badly overloaded, cords fray with use, and the occasional appliance decides to deliver a small, unexpected electric surprise to whoever happens to be holding it at the time. The toaster, the iron, the electric mixer, each one carries the quiet potential for a sudden jolt, a small puff of smoke, or a genuinely memorable afternoon. The great irony hanging over the entire arrangement is impossible to ignore. These machines are sold as pure liberation, as the dawn of a relaxed, thoroughly modern life in which technology quietly handles the hard work while the housewife simply presses a single button and settles back to relax. The advertisements depict her gliding effortlessly through a gleaming, sunlit kitchen, entirely untroubled and endlessly elegant. The reality, of course, is that she is still doing every bit of the actual work herself, only now with the added thrill of operating machinery that might genuinely take a finger the moment her focus wavers for even a second. So you finish the laundry with all 10 fingers still miraculously intact, which counts as a genuine victory by any measure, switch off the roaring vacuum at last, and survive yet another round with your helpful, hazardous household appliances. Progress marches steadily onward, shiny, chrome-plated, and endlessly hungry for its next opportunity. And once the machines have finished their part of the work, there remains still the small matter of the cleaning chemicals, because keeping a home this immaculately clean requires an entire supporting cast of substances that were, quite genuinely, actively trying to kill you the whole time. Let's talk honestly about keeping that home spotless, because it involves a home chemistry setup that would give any modern safety inspector an immediate heart attack. You scrub away with products harsh enough to double comfortably as industrial solvents, working in a closed kitchen with every window shut tight, wearing no gloves whatsoever and no mask, breathing every fume in like an absolute champion. There is a specialized spray for every conceivable purpose, and most of them contain something that has since been quietly pulled from the market entirely. And outside, on warm summer evenings, a truck rolls slowly down the street fogging the entire neighborhood in a thick cloud of pesticide, while delighted children run happily behind it through the mist because nobody has thought to tell them not to. Clean is the singular goal of this decade, and clean, it turns out, comes in a spray can, smells distinctly like victory, and is very slowly doing something quite unpleasant to everyone's lungs. Let's open the cupboard beneath the kitchen sink, because in a typical 1950s home, this modest cupboard functions as something close to a small private armory. The cleaning products of this era are not remotely gentle. They are powerful, genuinely corrosive, and designed from the ground up to obliterate stubborn grime through sheer, uncompromising chemical aggression. You mix them together quite freely, combining whichever products seem most likely to work, entirely unaware that certain combinations produce fumes capable of genuinely knocking a grown adult flat on the kitchen floor. The very concept of pausing to read a warning label barely exists yet, largely because meaningful warning labels themselves barely exist yet. You simply splash the product on, scrub with real determination, and hope firmly for the best possible outcome. The kitchen becomes ground zero for this daily chemical warfare. You are down on your knees scrubbing the floor by hand, wiping every counter, polishing the inside of the oven with products strong enough to strip the finish clean off a wooden table, all inside a small room with the window shut firmly against the winter cold. There is no ventilation to speak of, no protective gloves, no mask, nothing standing between you and the rising fumes except your own two lungs, working heroically to keep up. You finish the job feeling lightheaded and faintly dizzy, and you quietly chalk the sensation up to simple hard work rather than the invisible cloud you have just spent the better part of an hour inhaling directly. Then there is the era's great, sweeping national obsession with germs, which fuels an endless and enthusiastic appetite for anything promising to eliminate them entirely. Disinfectants, bleaches, sprays, and powders line every shelf of the local store, each one marketed as louder and harsher than the last. The stronger a product smells, the more effective everyone assumes it must be, so a genuinely good cleaning product gets judged in large part by exactly how much it makes your eyes water on contact. A truly clean home, by this particular standard, ought to smell roughly like a swimming pool that has completely given up on subtlety. And by that specific measure, you are doing wonderfully well indeed. But the real showstopper of this whole chemical era waits outside. On warm summer evenings, a truck rolls slowly down the street, releasing enormous billowing clouds of pesticide meant to knock down the season's mosquitoes. The most popular chemical of the age is sprayed generously and repeatedly across entire neighborhoods, public parks, and private yards alike, and it is widely considered a genuine marvel of modern suburban living. Children, thoroughly delighted by the novelty of the fog, run happily behind the slow-moving truck, playing directly in the drifting mist and weaving joyfully through the cloud as though it were some kind of magical summer treat. The watching adults smile warmly, because as far as anyone knows at the time, the whole spectacle is completely harmless. It is not, of course, but that particular memo remains years away from arriving. The entire prevailing approach to cleanliness across the 1950s amounts, in practice, to a low-grade chemical war waged squarely inside your own home, with you standing directly in the middle of the battlefield the entire time. The advertisements promise sparkling floors, a fresh, clean scent, and a healthier family, and they genuinely do deliver on the floors and on the scent, while quietly ignoring every troubling line of fine print beneath the surface. Clean has become something close to a moral virtue by this point, a visible sign of a good and diligent woman, and no amount of eye-watering fumes is ever going to stand in the way of that particular reputation. So you finish your scrubbing at last, blink hard to clear the sting from your eyes, and step back to admire a home so clean it practically glows from within, humming faintly with the chemical afterglow of a job thoroughly well done. Your floors are spotless, your kitchen counters gleam under the light, and your lungs have quietly filed yet another formal complaint that absolutely nobody will actually read for several more decades. Now, with the house standing immaculate and the appliances finally silenced for the day, there remains only one task left before the day can properly close, and it is currently coming together in the oven. Dinner. Let's sit down together at the table and brace yourself accordingly, because 1950s cuisine amounts to a genuine adventure in exactly what happens when convenience food collides head-on with a near-total absence of culinary restraint. The great obsession of this particular era is gelatin, and specifically not the harmless dessert variety most people imagine today. We are talking about savory gelatin, an entire wobbling tower of it, built around suspended vegetables, chunks of meat, and occasionally whole boiled eggs trapped inside like prehistoric insects preserved in amber. Everything else on the table tends to arrive from a can, gets combined enthusiastically with everything else that also arrived from a can, gets topped generously with crushed potato chips, and finally gets baked into a single, unified beige mass, proudly presented to the family as a casserole. Presentation matters here considerably more than flavor ever does, and flavor, frankly, was never really invited to this particular dinner party in the first place. You eat your portion, you smile warmly, and you assure the cook it is absolutely wonderful, because the only real alternative on offer tomorrow night is another generous helping of the tuna and banana surprise. Let's talk seriously about the gelatin for a moment, because it genuinely explains a great deal about this entire era's approach to food. In the 1950s, gelatin functions as far more than a simple dessert. It becomes a canvas, a personal challenge, practically a way of life for the ambitious home cook. Cooks suspend all manner of ingredients inside it in the name of pure sophistication. Shrimp, olives, shredded carrots, chopped ham, hard-boiled eggs, sometimes several of these all suspended together at once, locked in place within a single shimmering, jiggling dome. It gets served proudly at dinner parties, sliced neatly like a birthday cake, and every guest dutifully oohs and ahs at how thoroughly modern the whole presentation appears. The actual taste remains a distinctly secondary concern, trailing well behind the sheer visual thrill of watching an entire dinner course wobble gently as it makes its way to the table. The underlying reason for all of this enthusiasm is a genuine national love affair with convenience itself. New canned and packaged foods are flooding grocery store shelves at a remarkable pace, and they are marketed directly as the future, as complete freedom from the tedious drudgery of traditional home cooking. So the enthusiastic home cook of the 1950s reaches for a can of this, a packet of that, a tin of condensed soup, and combines them all together with the sheer joyful abandon of someone who has genuinely been told that opening a few cans now qualifies as a legitimate form of culinary artistry. Cream of mushroom soup becomes the era's secret ingredient in almost literally everything, functioning as a gray binding agent holding together dishes that otherwise have no real reason whatsoever to exist. The casserole stands as the crowning achievement of this entire culinary philosophy. Take a starch of some kind, add a canned protein, pour in a can of condensed soup, mix in a frozen vegetable, top the whole assembly with crushed potato chips or crackers, or in especially ambitious households, considerably more cheese than any single dish should legally be permitted to contain, and bake it all until it forms one unified beige landscape. It is filling. It is inexpensive. It is easy to prepare. And it tastes exactly as adventurous as its component ingredients would suggest, which is to say, not particularly adventurous at all. But it does look like a proper hot meal, and in the 1950s, looking the part genuinely accounts for most of the battle. Then there are the true crimes against food, the recipes that genuinely leave you wondering what exactly anyone involved was thinking at the time. Meat suspended directly in gelatin, bananas wrapped in ham and baked together in a savory sauce, salads that somehow consist mostly of mayonnaise and marshmallows quietly competing for space on the very same plate. These are not comedic exaggerations invented for effect. They appear in real, published cookbooks and respected magazines of the era, presented with complete sincerity as sophisticated dishes intended for the discerning modern hostess. The stranger and more unlikely the combination, the more genuinely impressive it was considered at the time, as though difficulty and good taste were somehow interchangeable qualities. And you, seated politely at the table, have your own small role to play in all of this. You are served a slice of something quivering and faintly mysterious, and you eat every bite of it with a warm, convincing smile firmly in place. You compliment the cook sincerely, because a genuine amount of effort clearly went into arranging your dinner inside a decorative mold, and because openly saying what you actually think about the meal is simply not something that is done in polite company. Have you ever tried to look genuinely delighted while chewing through a bite of jellied surprise? Families across the 1950s did exactly this, night after night, out of a combination of real love and firm social obligation. So you finish your plate entirely, you praise the chef warmly, and you quietly hope that tomorrow's dinner brings something that does not jiggle quite so much on the way to the table. Dinner has been successfully survived once again. Presentation has triumphed decisively over flavor, and the beige has, once more, been thoroughly conquered. Now, with the family fed and the dishes finally set aside to soak, let's rewind slightly to earlier in the day and follow the husband out the front door, because his own world of gray flannel suits and quiet conformity carries its own particular, exhausting weight. Let's follow him off to work, out the door, into the car, and onto the great daily conveyor belt of 1950s conformity. He works in an office, seated at a desk, inside a building full of other men wearing nearly identical gray suits, performing nearly identical jobs, each one quietly hopping to climb one single rung higher on a ladder that mostly leads, in the end, to a slightly larger desk near a slightly better window. Individuality is not exactly encouraged in this environment. You are expected to fit smoothly in, keep your head down, laugh dutifully at the boss's jokes, and never, under any circumstances, rock the boat. The company remains loyal to you in theory, and you remain loyal to the company in daily practice, right up until the exact moment you stop being useful to it. It is stable, it is respectable, and it is slowly, quietly turning an entire generation of men into interchangeable furniture-wearing hats. Let's start with the morning commute itself, that daily migration from the identical house to the identical office building downtown. You leave your quiet suburb each morning alongside every other husband on the block, part of a great synchronized departure of gray suits and felt hats moving together toward the city to sit down at a desk. The whole arrangement carries the quiet, steady rhythm of a well-oiled machine. Thousands of men flowing inward at precisely the same hour each morning, flowing back outward at precisely the same hour each evening, every one of them a small, entirely replaceable part inside a very large operation. The office itself functions as a genuine temple of sameness. Row after row of desks, row after row of men dressed within a narrow, carefully accepted band of respectability, all performing their assigned tasks beneath a low, steady hum of muted ambition. The unwritten rules governing this space are strict, and every single person there already knows them by heart. You dress like everyone around you. You think like everyone around you, or at the very least you say that you do. You agree readily with the boss. You laugh convincingly at his jokes whether or not they are genuinely funny, and you absolutely never stand out from the crowd, because standing out here is considered genuinely dangerous. The stated goal is to become a reliable, agreeable, promotable member of the team, and the team has very little room reserved for anyone too loud, too different, or too openly honest. The great promise dangled temptingly in front of every man is simple, lasting security. The company, the thinking goes, will take care of you. Work hard, follow every rule, remain loyal throughout, and you will be rewarded with a steady paycheck, a modest pension, and a slow, entirely predictable climb up through the ranks toward a corner office and eventually a gold retirement watch. In exchange, you hand the company your very best years, your personal ambition, and a fairly significant portion of your soul. It is a deal that feels perfectly solid right up until the broader economy shifts, or the company suddenly reorganizes and quietly discovers that loyalty, in practice, tends to flow mostly in one direction only, and the climbing itself is rarely all that thrilling. The ladder is genuinely real, but its rungs sit close together, and the reward for years of dedicated, faithful effort often amounts to little more than a marginally improved job title and a desk positioned slightly nearer to the window. You are not building anything you can honestly call your own. You are simply maintaining a fixed position within someone else's larger structure, performing work that is respectable, stable, and frequently, quietly, soul-crushing in equal measure. Excitement was never really the point of the arrangement. The real point is the steady, reliable march forward, the mortgage getting paid down month after month, the family provided for, and the outward appearance of genuine success carefully maintained throughout. Underneath all that gray flannel sits a real, unspoken pressure that almost nobody dares discuss openly. A man's entire worth, his identity, his standing among the neighbors, all of it rests squarely on being recognized as a good and reliable provider and a solid company man. There is essentially no room here to openly admit doubt, or boredom, or the creeping private suspicion that the whole arrangement might be a bit hollow at its core. You keep your suit freshly pressed, your smile firmly in place, and your complaints strictly to yourself, because a genuinely respectable man simply does not question the arrangement out loud. He simply keeps showing up, day after day. So you arrive at your desk each morning, nod politely to the nearly identical men seated beside you, and settle into another day of reliable, respectable sameness. One more interchangeable part quietly keeping the larger machine running smoothly. It is stable. It is safe. And it is slowly, methodically wearing an entire generation of men down to a smooth, agreeable finish. But there is one part of the working day that genuinely offers a welcome break from all this restraint, and it arrives conveniently right in the middle of the afternoon, poured generously over ice. It is time for lunch, and lunch, as we are about to see, turns out to be mostly alcohol. Let's talk honestly about the business lunch, an institution that ran almost entirely on alcohol and everyone's collective agreement to quietly pretend otherwise. In the 1950s, drinking during working hours is not remotely scandalous. It is treated as something close to a genuine job requirement. Business deals get made over cocktails. Meetings begin with a drink and typically end with several more. And the executive who returns to the office slightly unsteady on his feet at 3 in the afternoon is simply regarded as a man who takes his career seriously. There is a decanter sitting quietly in the corner office, a small bar cart tucked away nearby, and a spare bottle kept in the bottom desk drawer for emergencies, which turn out to be remarkably frequent. Nobody bothers counting the drinks consumed. Nobody mentions the likely consequences afterward. And everybody drives themselves home at the end of it, which is a detail we will return to shortly, and which is exactly as alarming as it sounds on first hearing. Let's set the scene properly at the restaurant, because this is supposedly where the real business gets accomplished. You and a colleague, or perhaps a client, or possibly the boss himself, settle comfortably into a booth right around noon. And before anyone even glances properly at the menu, the drinks have already arrived at the table. Martinis mostly, served cold, strong, and poured into glasses shaped like a genuine warning sign. The first drink is meant to help everyone relax. The second drink is meant to actually get down to business. The third drink arrives simply because the first two proved so remarkably effective. Somewhere in the resulting haze, a deal may or may not actually get struck, and everyone at the table agrees afterward that it was an extremely productive meeting regardless. The underlying logic, such as it is, holds that alcohol effectively lubricates the entire machinery of business. A man loosened up by a couple of confident cocktails is friendlier, more agreeable, and considerably more likely to sign on the dotted line. Trust, in this world, gets built over gin. Genuine relationships get cemented over good whiskey. The whole practice is treated as a sophisticated professional skill in its own right, the ability to drink steadily through an entire lunch and still return to the office capable of forming coherent sentences afterward. A man who cannot reliably hold his liquor is quietly judged by his peers, not for the drinking itself, but specifically for being bad at it. And the drinking never really stops confined to lunch alone. The office itself remains well stocked at all times. Many an executive keeps a full bottle tucked away in a desk drawer, along with a small set of glasses close at hand, ready to pour a drink for a visiting client, a passing colleague, or simply for himself during a particularly difficult afternoon. There are bar carts quietly parked in corner offices, decanters lined up on shelves, and a general, unspoken understanding that a drink held in hand at 4 in the afternoon is simply a sign of a man who has genuinely arrived in his career. The line separating working from drinking is not so much blurred here as it was simply never drawn in the first place. The consequences of all this steady daytime drinking are treated with a remarkable, almost willful lack of curiosity. The afternoon's productivity that quietly evaporates with each round. The important decisions made by men who are 3 confident cocktails past their own best judgment. The slow, steady toll it takes on bodies that are also, simultaneously, being fed heavy steak, a pack of cigarettes, and constant workplace stress in roughly equal measure. None of it gets discussed openly, because discussing it honestly would require admitting that the smooth, successful, martini-soaked businessman might not actually be quite as in control of himself as he outwardly appears. And then, at the very end of it all, comes the part that should genuinely stop your heart. Everyone drives home afterward. There is no real second thought given to climbing behind the wheel of a large, fast, entirely seatbelt-free automobile after a long, liquid business lunch, because the idea that this arrangement might constitute a genuine problem simply has not taken hold yet in the wider culture. The roads fill each afternoon with men navigating their way home on pure instinct and stubborn optimism, and the resulting toll is exactly as grim as you might reasonably expect, though nobody at the time is keeping the kind of careful records that would make anyone particularly nervous about it. So you finish your third martini of the afternoon, shake hands warmly on a deal you will genuinely struggle to recall clearly by evening, and stroll casually back to the office feeling very much like a captain of industry. The whole system runs quietly on gin and denial in roughly equal measure, and business, by every outward appearance, has genuinely never been better. Now, while the men enjoy their long, boozy afternoon lunches, let's check in properly on the women who wanted a genuine seat at that same table, and who quickly discovered the door had already been firmly locked against them. Let's talk honestly about the women who wanted more out of life than a spotless kitchen, and who very quickly discovered that the 1950s had entirely different plans in store for them. If you happen to be a woman with genuine career ambitions, your options are generously narrowed down to teacher, nurse, or secretary, and even these limited choices are widely treated as a pleasant enough way to pass the time until marriage arrives to rescue you from any lingering ambition. You will be paid considerably less than the man working right beside you performing the exact same job, and this pay gap is not remotely treated as a secret. It is simply accepted as how things naturally are. You cannot easily open a bank account in your own name, nor can you obtain credit without a man's signature backing you up. Your job itself may vanish entirely the moment you marry, or the moment you become visibly pregnant. And should you dare to express any real frustration with this whole arrangement, you will be gently reassured that you are actually quite lucky, that your true career lies with your husband, and that wanting anything more than that is considered a little bit unnatural. Let's look honestly at the short list of acceptable career paths, because the list really is remarkably short. A woman may teach, at least until the day she marries. She may work as a nurse, tending carefully to patients under the direct supervision of male doctors who make every meaningful decision. She may type, file paperwork, and answer telephones as a secretary, quietly smoothing the entire working day of a boss who earns several times her own salary for work that often depends almost entirely on her competence behind the scenes. These represent the fully respectable options available, and they share one obvious common feature. They are all supporting roles, carefully positioned beneath a man's authority, and universally understood by everyone involved to be strictly temporary. Because that is the great unspoken assumption running underneath the entire arrangement. A working woman is never truly building a lasting career. She is simply filling time productively before her real life begins. The general expectation is that she will work for a modest few years, successfully catch a husband along the way, and then retire gracefully into full-time domestic life, exactly where she is presumed to belong. Any genuine ambition beyond that point is regarded with a curious mixture of gentle amusement and quiet suspicion. A woman who genuinely wants to rise, to lead a team, to earn as much as the man at the next desk, is never admired for her evident drive. She is quietly considered a bit odd instead, and possibly a little sad. The pay gap itself is neither hidden nor seriously denied by anyone. It is simply built directly into the underlying structure of the workplace. A woman performing the identical job to the man seated at the very next desk earns noticeably less for it, and everybody around her already knows this to be true. The reasoning offered, on the rare occasion any reasoning gets offered at all. holds that a man has a family depending on him for support, while a woman is presumably only earning a bit of pocket money on the side. It is an argument that conveniently overlooks every single woman quietly supporting herself or her entire family on that smaller paycheck, and the barriers extend well beyond the office walls themselves. A woman frequently cannot open a bank account, secure a loan, or obtain credit in her own name without a husband or father formally vouching for her first. Her entire financial life is treated as something requiring careful management by a man, as though handling money were some specialized skill she simply could not be trusted to manage on her own. She can run an entire household budget with genuine surgical precision and still remain legally unable to sign for a simple loan using only her own signature. Then there is the matter of the exit itself, which is frequently not remotely her own choice to make. Marry, and a great many employers of the era simply expect you to leave your job entirely. Become pregnant, and your position may quietly disappear altogether because a visibly expectant woman in the workplace is widely considered improper. Her employment in practice lasts precisely as long as her single, childless status happens to last. And the moment that status changes, so too does her welcome at the office. And should any of this genuinely frustrate her, the surrounding culture already has a soothing answer standing ready. You are lucky, it insists. Your husband is your career. Your home is your kingdom. Wanting anything more than that is not merely unrealistic. It is treated as faintly unnatural, a quiet sign that something inside you has gone slightly wrong somewhere along the way. So the frustration simply goes quiet, tucked carefully away alongside all the other feelings women of this era are not really supposed to have in the first place. So she accepts the smaller paycheck, the supporting role, and the gentle reassurance that she ought to feel grateful for it, and she carries steadily on. The door to the boardroom remains firmly shut for the foreseeable future. Now, whether you happen to be a woman or a man living through this particular decade, sooner or later your body is going to require professional attention. So let's step carefully into the doctor's office, where confidence runs remarkably high, and the underlying science, frankly, runs a good deal thinner. Let's talk honestly about medicine, which in the 1950s amounts to a genuinely thrilling mixture of real, hard-won breakthroughs and ideas that make a modern listener wince outright. On one hand, real medical progress is genuinely happening all around you. On the other hand, you can walk casually into a local shoe store and slide your own feet directly into a machine that x-rays them with real radiation purely for the entertainment value, just to double-check the fit. Doctors of the era recommend cigarettes with total confidence, prescribe questionable pills with cheerful enthusiasm, and hand out advice that will age about as gracefully as milk left sitting in direct summer sun. Certain treatments offered for genuine mental distress are brutal and poorly understood at best, and a single diagnosis can follow a person around like a permanent shadow for the remainder of their entire life. You are expected, throughout all of this, to trust your doctor completely, ask no meaningful questions, and simply accept that whatever he tells you is final, even in the moments when what he happens to be telling you is that you should relax a little more and perhaps smoke a bit more besides. Let's give proper credit where it is genuinely due first, because this particular era does deliver some real medical triumphs worth remembering. Antibiotics are working genuine, honest miracles, transforming once deadly infections into little more than minor inconveniences almost overnight. Surgical techniques are steadily advancing. An important vaccine is quietly on its way that will soon lift a terrible, long-standing fear from an entire generation of anxious parents. There is real, life-saving science actively happening throughout this decade, and it thoroughly deserves genuine respect. The trouble is that all of this legitimate progress sits directly alongside practices that look, from where we stand today, absolutely unhinged. Take, for instance, the shoe-fitting machine, a genuine and common fixture found in shoe stores right across the country during this era. You slide your feet directly into the machine, peer curiously through a small viewer, and admire a live, glowing X-ray image of the bones inside your own feet, all the while being steadily bathed in real radiation for absolutely no legitimate medical reason whatsoever. Children genuinely love the novelty of it. Parents think the whole gadget is rather clever. The salesman uses it enthusiastically as a clever gimmick to help sell more shoes. Nobody pauses to seriously wonder whether repeatedly irradiating a customer's feet just to check the fit of a new pair of loafers might qualify as an unwise long-term strategy, largely because the genuine dangers of radiation exposure are understood by very few people at the time, and worried about by almost nobody at all. Then there is the medical profession's genuine enthusiasm for cigarettes, which we have already touched on earlier, but which bears repeating clearly within this particular context. Doctors do not merely tolerate smoking among their patients. Some of them actively recommend it, lending their own considerable professional authority to cigarette advertisements and reassuring nervous patients directly that a good, calming smoke can genuinely help settle frayed nerves. When the very people trusted to guard your health are personally endorsing the exact thing quietly harming it behind the scenes, you begin to grasp the true scale of the confusion running through this era. The pills themselves represent their own separate adventure entirely. There is a rapidly growing public appetite for tonics, tablets, and remedies of every conceivable kind, dispensed with total confidence and taken on pure faith by patients. Some of these do very little at all. Some genuinely cause real harm. The rigorous testing that would normally catch the more dangerous ones is often remarkably thin or entirely absent altogether, and the full consequences of a brand new drug are frequently only discovered well after a great many people have already taken it themselves. You swallow whatever you are given and simply hope your doctor knew best, because openly questioning him is simply not considered the done thing in polite society. The treatment of genuine mental distress remains the single hardest part of this era to look at honestly, so we will look at it plainly and briefly here. Understanding of the human mind remains quite limited throughout this decade, and some of the interventions used on genuinely suffering people are severe, poorly understood, and inflicted with a level of confidence far exceeding the actual medical knowledge behind them at the time. A person struggling emotionally could find themselves subjected to treatments that were, at best, remarkably crude, and a single diagnosis once handed down could follow that person for the rest of their entire life afterward. It stands today as a sobering reminder of how thoroughly an era's outward certainty can sometimes run well ahead of its actual wisdom. Threaded quietly through absolutely all of this sits the towering, largely unquestioned authority of the doctor himself. He is simply not to be questioned in any meaningful way. His word is treated as final, his confidence as total, and the patient's assigned role is simply to nod along, comply fully, and remain grateful throughout. A second opinion is nearly unthinkable to seek out. So you place your complete trust in a man who might genuinely be a brilliant, skilled healer, or who might instead be about to casually irradiate your feet for the third time this year, and you have remarkably little reliable way of telling which one he actually is beforehand. So you take your prescribed medicine, thank the doctor sincerely on your way out, and head home hoping fervently that he was right about all of it, because he certainly seemed entirely sure of himself throughout. Now, if trusting one single professional so completely with your own body already felt nerve-wracking enough, let's meet another professional entirely, one whose waiting room inspires a very particular, very specific kind of dread: the dentist. Since we are already placing our trust so fully in the professionals of this era, let's open wide for the dentist, an experience that in the 1950s ranges anywhere from mildly unpleasant to genuinely medieval in practice. The drills run notably slow. The anesthetic remains entirely optional at the dentist's discretion, and the general prevailing attitude toward pain itself is that a bit of suffering builds real character. You have grown up on a steady childhood diet of sugar, soda, and considerably more sugar besides, so your teeth are already staging something close to a full-scale rebellion by adulthood. Fluoride is a genuinely new development, and it is viewed with real, deep suspicion by a fair number of people as some kind of sinister plot. If a particular tooth happens to be bothering you, the standard solution is very often simply to remove it entirely and move steadily on with your life afterward. A visit to the dentist becomes something you put off for as long as humanly possible, right up until the exact moment your own jaw finally makes the decision for you. Let's start with the drill itself, the single instrument that genuinely haunts the dreams of an entire generation. It runs slow, and slow proves to be the real enemy here, because a slow-moving drill spends a long, grinding stretch of time doing its work, while you grip the armrests tightly and quietly reconsider every single choice that led you to this particular chair. The steady whine of it fills the entire small room. You feel every last vibration directly in your skull, and the whole experience stretches out with a kind of leisurely, almost deliberate cruelty. Modern drills today are quick and precise. This one takes its own sweet time, and you feel every single second of it. Then there is the matter of pain relief itself, treated throughout this era more as an occasional luxury than any kind of guaranteed standard. Anesthetic certainly exists and is available, but it is not always actually offered to the patient, and there remains a lingering sense among some practitioners of the time that a little genuine suffering is simply part of the overall deal. You are expected to sit still, remain brave, and quietly endure whatever comes. Grimacing is tolerated well enough. Complaining out loud is not especially welcomed. The prevailing philosophy of the day holds that discomfort itself is character building, which of course is remarkably easy to say from the far end of the room that is not currently holding the drill. The underlying reason you find yourself in this particular chair at all traces largely back to diet. Sugar is genuinely everywhere throughout the 1950s, poured liberally into breakfast cereal, dissolved generously into soda, baked directly into nearly everything, and consumed with real, joyful abandon by a population that has not yet been meaningfully warned about any of it. Your teeth, subjected daily to this relentless sweet assault, respond exactly the way teeth naturally do under such conditions. They decay steadily. Cavities become genuinely common throughout the population, and the local dentist stays remarkably busy cleaning up after an entire nation with a serious, unchecked sugar habit and very little real understanding of what it is actually doing to their mouths over time. Fluoride, the very substance that will eventually help enormously with all of this, arrives during this particular era and is met in a number of communities with real, deep suspicion. When certain towns begin adding it carefully to their public water supply, specifically to help strengthen residents' teeth, a genuine wave of public alarm follows close behind, with a number of people becoming firmly convinced it represents some kind of plot, a poison, or a scheme of one variety or another. The idea that this simple public health measure will go on to quietly save millions of teeth over the coming decades gets entirely lost in all the surrounding noise. Progress arrives quietly, and a meaningful portion of the public greets it instead as a genuine threat. And when a particular tooth is truly beyond any reasonable saving, or simply beyond the patience of the dentist that afternoon, the standard solution is often remarkably blunt. Pull it. Extraction becomes a common, everyday answer to serious dental trouble, considerably quicker and cheaper than the careful, painstaking work required to actually save a struggling tooth, and it leaves a great many people noticeably short several teeth by the time they reach middle age. Keeping a full set of your own natural teeth all the way into old age is far from any kind of guarantee, and dentures become a familiar, unremarkable fact of daily life for a great many adults. All of which helps explain precisely why the dentist inspires such widespread dread throughout this era. You put the visit off for as long as you possibly can. You ignore the first small twinge, then the growing ache, then the eventual throb, quietly hoping the whole problem will simply resolve itself on its own, right up until the pain finally becomes genuinely unbearable, and your own jaw hauls you bodily into the chair against your will. By that point, the news waiting for you is rarely good. so you leave the dentist's office feeling numb. Or in some cases, not remotely numb at all, minus one tooth and plus a fresh memory that will keep you well away from that particular chair for as long as you can possibly manage afterward. Now, with your body and your teeth having somehow both survived the professionals, let's step back outside into the neighborhood itself, where an entirely different kind of pressure sits quietly waiting, and it is measured almost entirely in whatever the neighbors just happen to purchase. Let's talk about the neighbors, and the exhausting national sport of quietly pretending you are doing noticeably better than they are. The 1950s runs almost entirely on outward appearances, and appearances, as it happens, are genuinely expensive. Your neighbor rolls home in a brand new car, and suddenly you find yourself needing a new car as well. They bring home a television set, a larger refrigerator, a shinier lawn mower, and all at once your own perfectly functional possessions begin to feel embarrassingly outdated by comparison. Advertising has thoroughly convinced everyone that genuine happiness sits just one purchase away, and convenient credit has helpfully arrived just in time to ensure you can buy that happiness today and quietly panic about the resulting bill later. So you spend money you do not entirely have, on things you do not entirely need, in order to impress people you do not particularly even like all that much. It is a treadmill. It is genuinely exhausting. And everyone around you is smiling their way through it with gritted, sugar-damaged teeth. Let's start with the car parked in the driveway, because the car remains the single loudest statement any family can possibly make. When the neighbor rolls proudly home in a gleaming new model, all chrome trim and dramatic tail fins and fresh paint catching the afternoon light, the entire street takes notice, and something inside you quietly shifts. Your own car, perfectly fine and functional only yesterday, suddenly looks tired, small, and faintly embarrassing parked right there in your own driveway. The car itself has not changed one bit. Your feelings about it certainly have, because it is now being measured directly against the shiny new arrival sitting proudly next door. And so a plan slowly begins to take shape in your mind, a plan you genuinely cannot quite afford, to replace a perfectly working car with one that will properly impress. The same underlying logic infects absolutely everything else around the neighborhood. The neighbor buys a new television set, so naturally you now need a television set of your own too, and ideally, a somewhat larger one at that. They purchase a bigger refrigerator, and suddenly yours begins to feel noticeably cramped and old-fashioned by comparison. A new lawn mower here, a new washing machine there, a fresh set of patio furniture out back, each individual purchase quietly raising the bar just a little higher for everyone else living on the block. It amounts, in practice, to a genuine arms race conducted entirely through consumer goods, where the weapons of choice are household appliances, and the battlefield is the neatly trimmed front lawn. Fueling all of this relentlessly is the advertising industry itself, which has grown by this point into a powerful and genuinely relentless cultural force. The core message, repeated endlessly across television, radio, and every glossy magazine page, is remarkably simple and deeply seductive. You remain just one purchase away from real happiness. Buy this particular item, and you will finally feel modern. Buy that one, and you will be properly admired by everyone around you. The right products the advertisements promise will make you a better spouse, a better parent, a fundamentally better person overall. It is a promise, of course, that can never quite be fully kept, because the very moment you finally buy the thing, a newer, shinier thing inevitably appears on the shelf, and the finish line quietly moves itself once again. And here is the clever invention that makes this entire arrangement possible in the first place: credit. In earlier decades, if a family genuinely could not afford something outright, they simply did without it until the day they finally could. Now, increasingly, you can buy the item immediately and pay for it slowly over time in convenient installments, on terms that feel perfectly manageable while standing in the store and considerably less manageable later, seated at the kitchen table on the first of the month with the bills spread out in front of you. Debt quietly becomes a normal, accepted part of this shining new life, a quiet weight sitting beneath the gleaming surface, the genuine price of keeping up appearances alongside everyone else. So families across the country stretch themselves remarkably thin chasing a carefully polished image. They fill their homes with the very newest available things, park the newest possible car proudly out front, and present a picture of comfortable, effortless success to the entire watching neighborhood. Behind that carefully maintained picture, a great many of these same families are genuinely anxious about money, quietly juggling monthly payments, and privately exhausted by the whole ongoing effort. But you would honestly never know it from the outside, because admitting any of it openly would defeat the entire purpose of the exercise. The whole point, after all, is to look convincingly like you are winning. The cruel joke running underneath all of it is that everyone on the block is doing precisely the same thing at precisely the same time, which means, in the end, that nobody ever actually wins this particular game. You strain to impress neighbors who are simultaneously straining just as hard to impress you right back. Everyone performing prosperity for an audience that is genuinely too busy performing their own version right back to be truly impressed by anyone else's efforts. It is a treadmill dressed up convincingly as an entire lifestyle, and stepping off it is considered nearly unthinkable, because stepping off would mean openly admitting you simply could not keep up with everyone else. So you sign the paperwork, park the shiny new car proudly in the driveway, and wave cheerfully across the fence at the neighbors. Just another happy family, by every outward appearance, living the dream comfortably on borrowed money. Now, beneath all of this cheerful spending and gleaming surface prosperity, there runs a much deeper unease threading quietly through the entire decade, a genuine fear that no amount of purchasing power can ever fully fix. Let's talk honestly about the bomb. Let's talk about the quiet, persistent dread humming steadily underneath this entire shining decade, because the 1950s are lived out almost entirely in the long, looming shadow of the atomic bomb. At school, your own children practice hiding from a full nuclear explosion by crouching obediently beneath their small wooden desks and covering the backs of their necks with their hands, as though a simple school desk has ever once won a serious argument with an atomic weapon. There are regular drills. There are reassuring educational films, and there is even a cheerful little jingle designed to help every child remember exactly what to do the moment the sky itself seems to end. The watching adults smile warmly and reassure their children that everything is perfectly fine, then quietly go home afterward and lie awake at night genuinely wondering if that is actually true. It is a genuinely strange thing to raise an entire generation on a steady diet of optimism and looming annihilation simultaneously, and yet somehow the 1950s managed to pull off exactly that combination. Let's step directly into the classroom, where the single strangest ritual of the entire decade quietly plays out. The teacher gives a simple signal, and the children immediately drop down to the floor, crawl beneath their small wooden desks, tuck their heads down low, and cover the backs of their own necks with their small hands. This constitutes the official, sanctioned plan for surviving a genuine nuclear attack: a wooden desk. The very same desk that regularly struggles to survive one rowdy Friday afternoon is presented, with a completely straight face, as an effective shield against one of the single most powerful weapons ever devised by human beings. The children practice this drill dutifully, because they are told to, and because at their young age, hiding obediently under a piece of furniture on command hardly ranks as the strangest thing an adult has ever asked of them. To help the whole unsettling business go down a little more smoothly, these drills arrive wrapped carefully in cheerful, reassuring packaging. There are brightly narrated educational films that gently walk children through exactly what to do, step by careful step. There is a friendly cartoon character, and a genuinely catchy little tune designed to make the entire grim business feel manageable, even faintly enjoyable. In much the same way, a cheerful song about washing your hands can turn an ordinary chore into something resembling a game. The underlying message, delivered always with a warm smile, is that if you simply remember the correct steps, everything will turn out perfectly fine. It amounts, in its own way, to a genuine masterclass in making the truly unthinkable feel entirely routine. Of course, the watching adults understand, at some level, that a simple wooden desk is not actually going to accomplish very much in a real nuclear scenario. These drills are less about providing any genuine physical protection and considerably more about giving everyone present something concrete to actually do with their underlying fear. A clear set of steps to follow so that the surrounding terror has somewhere specific to go. There is real comfort found in routine, even a fundamentally useless one, and there is genuine value in keeping an entire room full of children calm and orderly. But underneath that reassuring little jingle sits a fact so genuinely enormous that most people simply cannot bring themselves to hold it directly in mind. So instead, they hold onto the routine. Outside the classroom walls, this same dread hums quietly everywhere, humming steadily beneath the shiny surface of the entire decade. It sits in the daily newspapers, in the evening newsreels, in the tense reports describing a distant rival nation now armed with weapons entirely its own. Families discuss the whole situation carefully in careful, sideways conversations, not wanting to frighten their own children unnecessarily, yet never quite able to fully ignore the underlying reality themselves either. The bomb becomes the uninvited guest quietly present at every family dinner table, rarely named directly out loud, yet always somehow present, coloring the overall mood of the entire era with a low, persistent background anxiety. And this represents the great contradiction that the 1950s somehow managed to live comfortably inside of. On the surface, there is boundless optimism, gleaming new appliances, cheerful advertisements everywhere, and a firm, shared belief in a bright, thoroughly modern future ahead. Just beneath that surface sits the quiet, unshakable certainty that all of it could vanish in a single blinding flash. That the very same modern science responsible for filling homes with wonderful new conveniences has also, somewhere along the way, built something genuinely capable of ending everything at once. These two contradictory beliefs coexist quietly side by side, held simultaneously by the very same smiling people at the very same time. So the children crawl obediently beneath their small wooden desks, the cheerful jingle plays on, and everyone present agrees to feel just a little bit safer for having practiced the routine one more time. The underlying fear itself never truly goes away. It simply learns over time to wear a friendly public face. And for a number of families, a friendly face alone proves not nearly enough reassurance. So they grab a shovel instead, head out into the backyard and start digging, following naturally from that cheerful thought, let's step outside into the backyard, where a fair number of families are quietly digging a hole in the ground and calling the result genuine peace of mind. The backyard fallout shelter becomes something of a defining symbol of this entire era. A small reinforced concrete box buried carefully beneath the garden, stocked generously with canned food, bottled water, and enough basic supplies to comfortably wait out the end of the world in only mild discomfort. Magazines of the time run genuinely helpful step-by-step guides on exactly how to build one, precisely how to properly stock one, and rather awkwardly, extended discussions on whether you are actually morally permitted to keep your own neighbors locked out of yours once the worst finally happens. It amounts, in the end, to the ultimate 1950s contradiction. A home improvement project built specifically for the apocalypse, sitting quietly beneath the tomato plants out back, patiently waiting for a day that everyone sincerely hopes never actually arrives, yet plans carefully for regardless. Let's look more closely at the shelter itself, because it truly is a genuinely strange addition to make to the family home. Picture a reinforced concrete room buried directly in the backyard, reached by way of a small hatch or a short flight of steps, sealed carefully against whatever might be happening in the world above. Inside, shelves line the walls, stocked with canned goods, large jugs of water, a basic first aid kit, a battery-powered radio, and whatever else a given family imagines it might reasonably need to survive the grim aftermath of a genuine catastrophe. It functions essentially as a small basement built for a much darker purpose entirely, a compact private bunker tucked quietly between the flower beds, and Building 1 is genuinely presented, throughout the popular press of the time, as a sensible, thoroughly responsible thing for any modern family to undertake. The magazines and helpful pamphlets of the era treat the entire project with a kind of brisk, cheerful practicality. Here is precisely how to dig it out properly. Here is exactly how to reinforce the walls correctly. Here is a suggested, carefully calculated list of essential supplies, and here is roughly how long each item will realistically last. It is written throughout in the very same cheerful, can-do tone typically used for building a new backyard patio or installing a modern kitchen, as though calmly preparing to outlive the complete end of civilization, or simply the next practical item on an ordinary home improvement checklist. The overall effect lands as genuinely surreal. Serious disaster planning delivered with all the breezy enthusiasm typically reserved for a weekend hobby project. Stocking the shelter properly becomes its own small, recurring domestic ritual. Families lay in careful supplies of preserved food, dutifully rotate the stored water every so often, check the flashlight batteries regularly, and quietly reassure themselves along the way that they are now genuinely prepared for whatever might come. There is a strange, genuine comfort found in all of it, a real sense of personal control over something that otherwise sits almost entirely outside of anyone's actual control. If you cannot realistically prevent the coming catastrophe itself, you can at least prepare a tidy, well-organized room to sit quietly inside while it happens around you. The shelter offers, most likely, not any genuine practical safety, but rather the comforting feeling of safety, which in an anxious age turns out to be worth a very great deal indeed. Then there is the uncomfortable question that almost nobody particularly wants to ask directly out loud, yet which the magazines of the time raise anyway with surprising frequency. When the warning siren finally sounds and you seal yourself safely inside your own carefully prepared shelter, what exactly do you do about the desperate neighbors now pounding urgently on your sealed hatch? The very same neighbors who never got around to building a shelter of their own. Your carefully calculated supplies were only ever meant for your own immediate family. There is simply not enough stored food and water for the entire surrounding street. And so, right there in the pages of otherwise perfectly respectable publications, people genuinely debate at length whether it is morally acceptable to keep desperate neighbors locked firmly outside, to guard your own hole in the ground by force if it should ultimately prove necessary. It offers a genuinely grim little glimpse into just how thin the whole decade's cheerful surface really was underneath. The shelter itself manages to capture this entire decade neatly within a single buried concrete box. Above ground sits the neatly manicured lawn, the carefully tended tomato plants, the white picket fence, the whole picture-perfect image of settled suburban contentment. Below ground sits a small room built entirely around the quiet expectation that all of it, every bit of it, might be wiped away at absolutely any moment. The two realities exist together, the optimism and the underlying dread, separated by nothing more than a few feet of ordinary garden soil and a sealed hatch. So the shelter sits there quietly waiting, fully stocked and sealed beneath the family garden, a genuine monument to a fear too large to properly name out loud and too real to simply ignore altogether. Most of these shelters, thankfully, are never actually used for their originally intended purpose, which represents the best possible outcome by any reasonable measure, and a great many of them quietly become ordinary storage rooms and root cellars in the years that eventually follow. Now, the fear of the atomic bomb was, at its core, a fear of a distant enemy located far away. But the 1950s also nursed a very different fear, one located considerably closer to home, a deep-seated suspicion that turned neighbor against neighbor, and it genuinely deserves to be examined here plainly and honestly. Let's talk about a different kind of fear entirely. The quiet fear that your own neighbor, your coworker, or even you yourself might one day be accused of privately thinking the wrong sort of thoughts. In the 1950s, widespread suspicion surrounding communism curdles steadily into something that reaches deep into ordinary everyday life. People are formally questioned, entire careers are permanently destroyed, and personal reputations are thoroughly ruined, often on nothing more than the strength of a passing rumor, a loose association, or simply a name appearing somewhere on a list. In Hollywood, throughout government offices, and inside ordinary schools, merely being suspected is very often enough to be formally punished, with actual guilt or genuine innocence rendered almost entirely beside the point. Neighbors quietly inform on their own neighbors. Friends grow noticeably careful about exactly what they say out loud and to whom. It becomes a climate where raw fear does the work that actual evidence really ought to be doing instead, and a great many fundamentally decent people quietly learn to keep their own heads down, just in case. To properly understand it, you have to first understand the underlying tension defining this particular age. The 1950s sit squarely within the early years of a long, tense standoff between two great world powers, and the fear of communist influence quietly spreading into everyday American life runs, both intense and, remarkably, widely felt throughout the population. That underlying fear is not entirely without some genuine basis, but it steadily grows into something far larger and considerably less careful than any actual real threat would reasonably justify. A rising suspicion that spreads gradually outward until it eventually touches a great many people who have genuinely done nothing wrong at all. Once fear of this scale truly takes hold, it stops bothering to ask for proof. The real consequences fall squarely on ordinary lives throughout the country. A person merely suspected of holding the wrong sympathies, or of associating with the wrong people, or of having once attended the wrong kind of meeting years earlier, can suddenly find their entire career abruptly over. Within the film industry specifically, writers, actors, and directors get placed on informal lists and quietly denied further work altogether, their names effectively becoming poison overnight, their livelihoods simply gone. Within government offices, employees are formally investigated and summarily dismissed. Within schools and universities, teachers face real pressure to actively prove their personal loyalty. The bare accusation itself does a great deal of the lasting damage, often long before any actual question of truth ever gets properly settled. What makes the whole phenomenon so genuinely corrosive is precisely how little actual evidence it ever requires. A simple rumor proves enough. An old, mostly forgotten friendship proves enough. A signature placed on some petition years earlier proves enough. People find themselves asked to account for their entire personal pasts, to carefully explain associations they had long since forgotten about, to somehow prove a negative regarding their own private hearts. And they are frequently asked, on top of everything else, to save themselves by numbing others in turn, passing the underlying fear along so that one person's private fright becomes another person's complete ruin. The mounting pressure to inform on others quietly turns the ordinary bonds of everyday trust into genuine liabilities, so people adapt, in exactly the way frightened people generally do. They grow noticeably more guarded. They watch carefully what they say and precisely to whom they say it. They think twice before joining any organization, signing any petition, or speaking freely about politics even among close friends. Conversations that would once have flowed openly become careful, hedged, and quiet instead. An entire society gradually learns to self-censor, not because anyone forbids open speech directly, but simply because the potential cost of the wrong word has become far too high a risk to reasonably take. Fear, it turns out, does not need to knock on every single door to fundamentally change how everyone behaves. It only needs to knock on enough of them. The deepest lasting harm falls on trust itself. When neighbors might genuinely report on their own neighbors, when a colleague's private suspicion alone can end your career, when simple friendship itself carries the real risk of guilt by association, the ordinary fabric of an entire community begins to fray badly. People pull inward defensively. They keep their social circles deliberately small and their honest opinions carefully to themselves. The cheerful, sociable public image of this era conceals a real and remarkably widespread weariness underneath, a persistent sense that you can genuinely never be entirely sure who might be listening, or precisely how your own words might one day come back to be used against you. In time, the fever eventually breaks, as such fevers generally do. And the country slowly begins reckoning honestly with just how much genuine damage was done to how many entirely innocent people, all in the name of collective safety. But for those who actually lived through the very worst of it, the resulting losses were real, and in many cases, permanent. Careers and reputations that simply never fully recovered afterward. It stands today as a genuinely hard lesson about exactly what fear can do to a free society when it is allowed to run well ahead of basic fairness. And it was far from the only injustice that this particular decade's shining surface managed to quietly conceal. There is another injustice, older still, and even more deeply woven into the fabric of daily life. And any genuinely honest account of this decade has to face it directly and plainly. Let's be entirely honest about a part of the 1950s that the picture postcards conveniently leave out altogether. For millions of Black Americans across the country, this shiny suburban dream simply is not on offer at all, and the decade's outward comfort is built squarely on a foundation of enforced separation and daily, grinding injustice. Segregation shapes nearly every part of daily existence. Where you are permitted to live, where you may sit down to eat, where you are allowed to take a seat, which schools your own children may attend, and precisely how you are treated the very moment you step outside your own front door. The governing rules are written down formally in some places and simply understood without needing to be written anywhere else, and the cost of ignoring them can be genuinely severe. Behind the smiling advertisements and the identical, cheerful families depicted everywhere, there exists an entire population of people being told, in 100 different ways, that this particular dream was never actually meant for them in the first place. To see this clearly, picture the ordinary shape of a single day. Across much of the country, segregation functions not as some occasional insult, but as the constant, unyielding structure underlying daily life itself. There are separate entrances, separate waiting rooms, separate drinking fountains, separate sections reserved on the public bus. There are restaurants that will simply refuse to serve you, hotels that will refuse to house you for the night, and entire neighborhoods where you are simply not permitted to purchase a home at all. The suburban dream sold so relentlessly to white families, the brand new house, the fresh start, the fair mortgage terms, is systematically kept entirely out of reach for others, closed off deliberately by law, by official policy, and by ordinary daily practice. The barriers themselves are not only the ones formally written into law. A great many are enforced instead through simple custom, through quiet intimidation, and through the ruthless, unspoken machinery of everyday exclusion. A family with the financial means to purchase a home in a nicer area frequently finds every single door mysteriously closed to them regardless. Lending gets quietly denied. Sales somehow fall through at the last moment. Whole districts get marked off informally as simply unavailable. The end result is that genuine opportunity itself becomes rationed strictly by race, and the resulting gap between what gets promised to some families and what actually gets offered to others grows steadily into an enormous chasm. Education tells largely the same troubling story throughout this period. Children get sent to entirely separate schools, and the schools set aside specifically for Black children are routinely given noticeably less funding, fewer available resources, older buildings, and worn-out second-hand textbooks. The promise that separate could somehow still mean genuinely equal amounts to little more than a convenient fiction on its face, and everyone paying real attention already knows this to be true. This particular decade does witness the beginning of a serious legal challenge mounted against that fiction. A landmark court ruling declaring segregated schooling formally unconstitutional. But a ruling handed down on paper and an actual changed reality on the ground proved to be two very different things entirely. And the resistance to real change proves both fierce and frequently violent. And there remains the daily, grinding weight of it all, the part that never quite fits neatly into any single written law. The constant, exhausting awareness of precisely where you are and are not genuinely welcome. The careful vigilance required simply to move safely through ordinary public spaces. The steady insults absorbed, the real dangers carefully navigated, personal dignity defended over and over again in 100 small and large moments throughout an ordinary day. For a black family living through the 1950s, the cheerful ease sold everywhere as the essential American way is simply not the actual texture of daily life. Vigilance is. Yet this same decade also stands as a genuine time of extraordinary courage. It is precisely during these years that a broader movement steadily gathers real force, that ordinary people begin actively refusing the terms they have long been handed, choosing instead to organize, to march, to directly challenge the entire rotten structure at real, significant personal risk. The quiet refusal to give up a bus seat, the determined fight to walk through a schoolhouse door, the steady, disciplined insistence on basic justice. These moments belong just as thoroughly to the story of the 1950s as the roadside diners and the chrome-tail fins do. The change itself is only just beginning here, and it will prove long and genuinely hard-fought in the years ahead. But it truly begins here, driven forward by people who simply decide that this particular injustice will not be allowed to stand any longer. So any genuinely honest telling of this decade has to hold both realities at once, the shining surface everyone remembers and the harsh underlying reality sitting directly beneath it. The comfort enjoyed by some, built quite deliberately on the exclusion of others. The nostalgia was never the entire story, and it genuinely never was. Now, this same decade's remarkably narrow idea of exactly who belonged within its shining dream extended in yet another direction as well, reaching directly into the most private and personal corners of people's lives. And this, too, genuinely must be told plainly here. Let's talk honestly about who was allowed to love whom during this era, because the 1950s keep a remarkably short and remarkably strict list on this particular question. If you happen to be gay, this decade is not merely unwelcoming toward you. It is openly hostile in ways formally backed by actual law. Same-sex relationships are criminalized outright, and simply being discovered can cost you your job, your family, your personal freedom, and your basic physical safety. People are formally dismissed from government positions simply for being suspected, nothing more. A great many people live out their entire lives in careful, ongoing secrecy, hiding who they truly are behind marriages of convenience and quiet, exhausting double lives, because the honest alternative amounts to complete personal ruin. The cheerful public conformity of this era carries a genuinely hard edge underneath, and that edge falls heaviest on anyone who simply does not fit neatly within the narrow mold provided. It is a lonely and dangerous time to simply be yourself, and countless people endure it with a quiet, genuine courage that history is only now, slowly, beginning to properly honor. To fully grasp the real weight of it, start with the underlying law itself. During this era, same-sex relationships are not merely frowned upon socially, they are formally criminal across much of the country. To love the wrong person is, quite literally on paper, to break the actual law, and the machinery of the state treats the matter accordingly. This is not simply a matter of social awkwardness or private disapproval among neighbors. It means real arrests. It means formal criminal charges. It means the constant, genuine risk that the most intimate part of a person's private life could be deliberately used to destroy absolutely everything else surrounding it. The resulting consequences reach directly into every corner of a person's daily existence. Discovery can mean the sudden, immediate loss of employment, as employers dismiss anyone merely suspected without any explanation required whatsoever. It can mean the complete loss of family connections, as relationships shatter under the combined weight of shame and fear. It can mean public exposure, deep humiliation, and considerably worse outcomes besides. During these particular years, organized campaigns are actively waged specifically to root gay people out of government work, treating a person's very existence as some kind of formal security risk. And thousands of people ultimately lose their entire careers to this sustained purge. Their names quietly marked, their livelihoods simply gone for good. Because the underlying danger is so genuinely total, most people are left with no real choice but to hide themselves carefully. Entire lives get lived out in careful secrecy, through coded language and guarded glances, within friendships and small communities that must remain entirely invisible to the wider watching world. Many people enter deliberately into marriages of convenience, constructing an outwardly conventional-looking life to serve as a protective shield, raising families while quietly carrying a personal truth they can never safely speak aloud. The sheer ongoing energy required to maintain that constant concealment, day after day, year after year without pause, proves genuinely immense, and it exacts a heavy, deeply lonely toll over time. The resulting isolation is perhaps the single cruelest part of the entire arrangement. In a decade genuinely obsessed with belonging, with fitting neatly into the mold of the happy, conventional family unit, anyone who simply cannot fit that mold is left profoundly alone as a result. There are precious few safe spaces available, few people to confide in honestly, and very little sense that others might be quietly sharing the exact same private struggle. The surrounding message arriving from every direction at once, from the law, from the church, from the family doctor, from the culture at large, insists that who you genuinely are is wrong, dangerous, and deeply shameful. To hold on to any real sense of your own personal worth against that constant, grinding pressure requires a genuine strength that is remarkably easy to overlook from a comfortable distance. And yet, even here, under the very worst of these hostile conditions, people manage to find one another anyway. Quietly, carefully, and always at genuine personal risk, small communities slowly form, real connections get carefully made, and the first fragile efforts toward organizing and mutual support begin gradually to appear. These early, cautious steps happen against genuinely enormous odds, largely hidden from public view, but they represent the true beginning of something lasting. The people who took those very real risks, who insisted on simply existing, and on finding one another even when doing so could cost them absolutely everything, genuinely deserve to be remembered today with real respect. So this too rightfully belongs within any honest account of this particular decade, the hard edge quietly hidden beneath all that cheerful public conformity, the real price paid by anyone who simply did not fit the mold. The 1950s asked everyone to look the same, live the same, and love within the same narrow lines, and it punished severely those who genuinely could not. Behind the tidy public image sat a great deal of quiet, enforced suffering, endured throughout with a courage this particular era largely refused to properly see or acknowledge. Now, having sat honestly with these harder underlying truths of the decade, let's return briefly to the surface, to the strange, elaborate rituals surrounding young romance, where even the simple act of falling in love arrived with its own detailed rulebook attached. Let's lighten the overall mood somewhat and talk about romance, 1950s style, which arrives complete with considerably more formal rules than most board games. Dating itself is a carefully choreographed ritual from start to finish. The boy does the asking, the boy pays for everything, the boy handles the driving, and a great many watchful adults hover conveniently nearby to ensure nothing improper occurs, with improper defined here in remarkably broad terms indeed. There is the formal practice of going steady, There is the tradition of being pinned. There is the boys' class ring worn carefully on a chain, each carrying its own elaborate meaning that everyone under the age of 20 already understands perfectly, and no watching adult particularly approves of. A young girl's reputation is treated throughout as something fragile and permanently damageable, easily ruined and essentially impossible to ever fully repair, while a boy's own reputation proves far more forgiving in comparison. Underneath all the shared milkshakes and the cheerful sock hops runs a strict, genuinely anxious code, governing exactly how much fun anyone is realistically permitted to have, and the honest answer throughout is not very much at all. Let's start with the actual ritual of the date itself, because it follows a script considerably tighter than any stage play. The boy always does the asking, without exception, because a girl who does the asking herself is considered forward, which functions as simply a more polite word for scandalous. The boy pays for absolutely everything on the date, because a girl who offers to pay is seen as upsetting the entire natural order of things. The boy provides all the necessary transportation, arriving promptly at her front door to be formally inspected by a watchful father who has apparently made it his life's personal mission to look as thoroughly unimpressed as humanly possible throughout the entire encounter. Every single step of the process is carefully prescribed in advance, and stepping outside those established lines invites raised eyebrows from absolutely every direction imaginable. Then there is the matter of supervision, which proves genuinely relentless throughout. Young couples are rarely, if ever, left truly alone together, because being alone naturally leads directly to temptation. And temptation leads inevitably to exactly the sort of thing the entire adult world seems organized specifically to prevent. There are watchful chaperones present at every school dance, strict curfews rigorously enforced by worried parents, and porch lights that flick suddenly on at suspiciously precise moments during the evening. A parked car quietly steaming up along some quiet country lane represents the stuff of genuine parental nightmares, and everyone involved already knows perfectly well that discovery would represent a catastrophe of the very highest order. The established customs surrounding young love come complete with their own strange vocabulary and accompanying props. Going steady means the couple is formally committed to one another, and it arrives with its own set of obligations and social status attached, functioning as a kind of informal teenage engagement complete with its own detailed etiquette. A boy might present a girl with his own class ring, far too large for her finger, so she wears it instead on a chain around her neck, or carefully wrapped in yarn to make it properly fit. This serves as a public announcement that she is now formally spoken for. There is the tradition of pinning. There are matching school jackets worn proudly. There are a dozen small signals scattered throughout that broadcast clearly and publicly exactly who belongs to whom. All of it carries deep, genuine meaning for the teenagers directly involved, and proves mildly alarming to the watching adults on the sidelines. But underneath this sweet romantic surface runs a genuinely harsh double standard, and it falls entirely and exclusively on the girl involved. Her personal reputation is treated as something delicate and utterly irreplaceable, a single fragile asset that can be permanently destroyed by nothing more than a passing rumor and can never afterward be properly rebuilt. One single whispered story, whether true or entirely false, can follow her around for years afterward and quietly shape how the entire town chooses to see her from that point forward. A girl must remain careful, always carefully vigilant, guarding not merely her own actual behavior but the mere outward appearance of it as well. Because appearance alone is precisely what she will ultimately be judged on by everyone around her. The boy, meanwhile, operates throughout under considerably gentler rules. The exact same behavior that would thoroughly ruin a girl's reputation gets casually shrugged off in a boy as simple high spirits, boys simply being boys, a passing phase he will naturally grow out of in time. He risks remarkably little in the whole arrangement, and is readily forgiven a great deal besides. She risks essentially everything and is forgiven for almost nothing at all. It amounts to a profoundly unequal arrangement, carefully dressed up throughout in the innocent, cheerful language of soda fountains and school dances. And the girls living through this particular era navigate it all with a quiet weariness the boys around them never once have to learn firsthand. So the young couple sits together sipping their shared milkshake, carefully watched from every conceivable angle, following every rule precisely to the letter, playing out a game where only one of the two players stands to lose far more than the other ever will. And where does all this careful, elaborate courtship ultimately lead? Straight to the altar, and remarkably fast at that. Because in the 1950s, romance carries exactly one socially acceptable final destination. Let's follow that courtship all the way to the altar, because in the 1950s, marriage itself is never treated as merely one option among several available choices. It stands instead as the option, full stop, and the surrounding social clock starts running remarkably young. A woman who remains unengaged by her early 20s is quietly regarded by everyone around her as a genuine problem requiring some kind of solution. So you marry, very often before you have truly come to know yourself, let alone the actual person now standing beside you at the altar, and you settle steadily into roles that were carefully assigned to you both long before you ever formally agreed to any of it. He earns the household income. She keeps the house running smoothly, and the entire arrangement gets presented throughout as simply the natural order of things, rather than as any genuine choice either person actually made for themselves. Divorce carries an enormous amount of social shame attached to it, so a great many genuinely unhappy couples simply choose to endure quietly instead, carefully keeping up appearances for the sake of the watching neighbors and their own children. Let's begin with the sheer social pressure to marry quickly, which proves genuinely enormous throughout this era and starts remarkably early in a young person's life. For a young woman especially, marriage is not merely gently encouraged, it is firmly expected, and expected soon after finishing school. The years immediately following graduation are widely understood as prime marrying time, and a woman who reaches her mid-20s while still single begins attracting genuine concern, quiet pity, and a great deal of unhelpful advice from virtually every relative she happens to have. There even exists a cruel little social label reserved for the woman who waits too long, a term that effectively turns simply remaining unmarried into a kind of personal failure. The underlying message throughout remains perfectly clear. Find yourself a husband and find him quickly. So couples across the country marry remarkably young, frequently younger than would seem entirely wise viewed from any real distance today. They pair off in their late teens and early 20s, often following a courtship measured only in a handful of months, and commit themselves to an entire shared lifetime alongside a person they are, in truth, still in the fairly early stages of actually getting to know. There proves to be remarkably little time available to properly figure out who you genuinely are before formally promising to spend forever standing beside someone else entirely. The romance itself is genuinely real, and the accompanying hope is genuinely real too, but so is the sheer breathless speed of the whole process, and so are the rigid roles already waiting patiently on the other side of the ceremony. And those particular roles prove remarkably rigid throughout. He will serve as the family's primary provider, out working in the wider world earning the necessary money. She will serve as the dedicated homemaker, keeping the house in order and raising the resulting children. This particular division of labor is never framed as merely one possible arrangement among several available options. It gets presented instead as simply how things are naturally meant to be, rooted deeply in nature itself according to the prevailing wisdom. There proves to be remarkably little room available to negotiate any genuinely different shape for your own marriage, because the overall shape has already been decided well in advance by everyone else around you. And stepping outside that predetermined shape invites the now familiar raised eyebrows from the surrounding community. The trouble, inevitably, is that not every single marriage entered into so quickly, under so much accumulated social pressure, ultimately turns out to be a genuinely happy one. People naturally change over time, or eventually discover they were fundamentally mismatched from the very start, or simply find that the rigid roles they were handed at the altar do not actually fit who they really are. And here, this particular era offers essentially no easy exit available. Divorce carries heavy social stigma throughout, treated widely as both a genuine scandal and a serious personal failure, particularly and especially for the woman involved. To formally end a marriage is to invite ongoing gossip, harsh judgment, and a permanent, lasting mark against your standing within the wider community. So a great many genuinely unhappy couples end up doing precisely the thing this particular decade quietly demands of them. They simply stay together regardless. They carefully keep up appearances, presenting a united and outwardly cheerful front to the watching neighbors, while the actual reality behind the closed front door may in fact be cold, emotionally distant, or quietly miserable throughout. The outward performance of a happy marriage becomes, in practice, considerably more important than the actual marriage itself. And the accumulated strain of maintaining that performance gets carried privately, especially by the women involved, who frequently possess remarkably few independent financial means to leave even if they genuinely wish to. None of this is meant to suggest the underlying love itself was never real, because very often it genuinely was, and a great many of these marriages in the end proved to be genuinely happy ones. But the whole surrounding system left dangerously little room available for the marriages that were not. So the young couple exchanges their vows on a beautiful, hopeful day, stepping forward into an entire shared life, whose fundamental rules were already firmly set long before the two of them ever actually met. And soon enough, that shared life fills steadily with the sound of children, because the 1950s are about to produce them in truly staggering numbers indeed. Let's talk honestly about the children themselves, because the 1950s produce them in genuinely staggering numbers, and then proceed to raise them with a level of confidence that occasionally borders on the reckless. Parenting advice throughout this era swings wildly from one extreme to another. Bobbies routinely sleep on their stomachs, surrounded by soft bedding, and safety, as we understand the concept today, functions more as a loose suggestion than any kind of firm rule. The crib itself may well be coated in questionable lead paint. The baby walker rolls happily toward the nearest staircase without a second thought. Mothers are handed an entire mountain of contradictory expert advice and expected somehow to follow every bit of it flawlessly while still appearing perfectly serene throughout. Children, meanwhile, are largely turned loose to roam the neighborhood freely until dinner time, entirely unsupervised, gloriously free-range, and blissfully unaware of the many household hazards quietly waiting for them at every turn. It is, by most accounts, a genuinely wonderful time to be a child, right up until the very moment it very suddenly is not. Let's start with the sheer number of bobbies involved, because the 1950s represent a genuine population boom in the most literal possible sense. Families across the country grow noticeably large, and having children is treated not merely as common, but as fully expected, a central and essential part of the whole married project itself. Maternity wards run busy around the clock, entire neighborhoods fill steadily with young children, and the surrounding culture reorganizes itself almost entirely around this rising tide of little ones. This particular generation will go on to define the coming decades, and right now they are all arriving at once, in numbers substantial enough to reshape the entire country. The advice given to the mothers raising all these children proves to be a genuinely moving target throughout. Various experts publish guidance with tremendous confidence, and that guidance shifts constantly, sometimes contradicting itself outright, sometimes contradicting the previous expert entirely. A mother is told firmly to be strict, then shortly afterward told to be gentle instead. She is told to feed her baby on a rigid, fixed schedule, then told to feed entirely on demand instead. She is expected throughout to absorb every bit of this shifting guidance, apply it flawlessly in practice, and never once appear anything less than calm and fully capable while doing so. The accumulated pressure to be a genuinely perfect mother proves immense, and the actual instructions for achieving that perfection keep shifting steadily underfoot the entire time. Then there are the specific practices that make a modern parent wince outright. Bobbies are commonly placed down to sleep on their stomachs, tucked snugly among soft bedding, pillows, and heavy blankets, arrangements now understood to carry real risk, but considered perfectly normal and entirely safe at the time. Cribs and other nursery furniture may well be finished with paint containing real lead, positioned right there, where a teething baby will happily gnaw away at it. The advice, the equipment, the entire setup reflects genuine parental love and care operating with a fundamentally incomplete understanding of what actually constitutes safety. The various gadgets designed to help new parents carry their own small adventures built right in. The baby walker, wildly popular throughout the decade, sets a mobile infant rolling rapidly around the house on wheels at genuinely surprising speed, cheerfully steering itself toward the nearest available staircase with remarkable consistency. Playpens, high chairs, and baby carriers are all built with remarkably little thought given to the actual hazards a sufficiently determined baby might discover within them. Each individual device is meant to make daily life easier for exhausted parents, and frequently does exactly that, while simultaneously and quietly introducing brand new ways for a small child to get into genuine trouble along the way. And then, once these children grow old enough to properly walk and run on their own, they are simply released outright into the wider world. This represents the great era of the free-range childhood, when children leave the house right after breakfast and are not genuinely expected back home again until dinner time, roaming freely throughout the neighborhood in loose, informal packs, largely unsupervised, inventing their own adventures as they go along. There is a real and genuine freedom found in all of this, a wildness and independence that later generations will look back on with real envy. There is also, naturally, a great deal that could go seriously wrong along the way, with no adult hovering nearby to catch any of it in time. The whole prevailing approach runs on a kind of cheerful, unshakable confidence, a firm faith that children are fundamentally tough, that a few scrapes here and there are perfectly healthy, and that everything will most likely turn out fine in the end regardless. Often enough, it genuinely does. So the children of this particular boom grow up loved, genuinely free, and surrounded throughout by hazards that nobody around them has quite fully noticed yet. And speaking of hazards nobody has quite noticed yet, let's open up the toy box, because the playthings of this particular decade were, in a fair number of documented cases, genuinely trying to cause them real harm. Let's open the toy box together, and then very slowly and carefully back away from it. The 1950s hand children an absolutely astonishing array of playthings that appear, on reflection, to have been designed by someone nursing a genuine grudge. There are lawn darts, heavy metal spikes that get hurled directly into the air near other human beings purely for entertainment purposes. There are chemistry sets containing genuinely dangerous substances, some of them even mildly radioactive, allowing your own child to conduct real chemical experiments and quite possibly a small domestic disaster along with them. There are toys featuring sharp edges, toxic lead paint, and small parts perfectly sized for accidental swallowing. Safety testing throughout the industry remains minimal at best, and the prevailing general philosophy holds that a few scrapes, minor burns, and near misses are simply an accepted part of growing up properly. The toys themselves genuinely are fun. They are creative and imaginative, and a fair number of them would today be confiscated immediately at almost any modern international border crossing. Let's start with the lawn darts, because they genuinely represent the crown jewel of this era's questionable toy selection. Picture a large, heavily weighted dart, a solid metal tip on one end and stabilizing fins on the other, specifically designed to be thrown high up into the air so that it arcs gracefully back down and sticks firmly into the grass somewhere near a marked target ring. Now picture this particular game being played by a group of children in an ordinary backyard full of other children. The game essentially involves flinging heavy metal spikes skyward and simply trusting that they will land safely in the grass rather than in a nearby playmate. It proves exactly as genuinely dangerous as it sounds on paper, and it is marketed cheerfully throughout as wholesome family entertainment for the whole backyard. Then there are the chemistry sets, which take a genuinely bold approach to the entire underlying concept of a children's toy. These are decidedly not the tame, thoroughly watered-down kits that would arrive in later decades. They come fully stocked with real chemicals, some of them genuinely hazardous, fully capable of producing actual chemical reactions, actual fumes, and on occasion actual small explosions right there on the family kitchen table. Certain sets even include genuinely radioactive material, marketed cheerfully to budding young scientists as a rare chance to conduct fully authentic scientific experiments at home. A sufficiently curious child equipped with one of these kits could genuinely learn a great deal about basic chemistry, and quite possibly a fair amount besides about burns, accidental poisoning, and a visit from the local fire department. The base materials used in even the most ordinary toys carry their own quiet menace throughout. Many toys are finished with paint containing real lead, and children, being children, end up putting a great deal of that painted surface directly into their mouths without a second thought. Metal toys arrive with genuinely sharp edges and rough manufacturing seams throughout. Small parts, perfectly sized for accidental swallowing, appear absolutely everywhere in an era well before anyone thought to formally warn against the practice. The toy itself might prove perfectly delightful right up until the precise moment it delivers a nasty cut, a case of accidental poisoning, or an unplanned trip to the family doctor. Underlying absolutely all of this sits the near total absence of any meaningful safety testing across the entire industry. There exists no robust regulatory system in place checking whether a given toy is genuinely safe before it ever reaches a child's eager hands. Manufacturers simply produce whatever happens to sell well, and what tends to sell well is whatever looks sufficiently exciting on the store shelf. So the toys grow steadily more ambitious over time in their genuine capacity to cause real harm. A product never has to prove it is safe. It simply has to be fun enough to justify the purchase, and danger, quite frankly, often makes a given toy considerably more fun in the first place. The prevailing philosophy of this age smooths the entire situation over quite neatly. Children are expected to be tough throughout, and a certain reasonable amount of injury is considered a perfectly normal, even a genuinely healthy, part of growing up properly. Scrapes, minor burns, cuts, and various near misses are all shrugged off as the ordinary bumps of childhood, rather than being recognized as clear signs that perhaps the flaming, spiked, or toxic plaything in question should never have been sold on store shelves in the first place. The end result is a generation that grows up genuinely resilient, in no small part because their childhood toys gave them so much regular practice at simply surviving. So the child eagerly unwraps a gift, genuinely delighted, and sets about happily playing with something that in any later decade would be swiftly pulled from every single shelf across the entire country. It proves genuinely creative. It proves thrilling. And it remains quietly hazardous throughout, much like nearly everything else in this particular household. And when the family wants to travel somewhere together, they climb aboard a vehicle that carries on this same proud tradition, a genuinely beautiful machine that also happens to be doing its absolute best to end them. Let's climb into the family car together, a gleaming, chrome-covered land yacht that proves beautiful, powerful, and thoroughly eager to hurt you at the first real opportunity. There are no seatbelts installed anywhere, because seatbelts are widely considered entirely unnecessary and mildly insulting toward any genuinely good driver. The dashboard itself is solid, unyielding metal throughout. The steering column does not collapse under impact, and in the event of a crash, this entire gorgeous machine instantly becomes a remarkably stylish trap. The gasoline used is leaded throughout, quietly poisoning everyone who happens to breathe in the resulting exhaust, which functions as essentially everyone nearby. Children bounce freely around the back seat like loose bags of groceries, occasionally even riding up on the rear window, lends itself purely for the improved view. The car represents genuine freedom. The car represents real social status. The car stands as the pride of the entire family, and the car is also, by every available statistic, doing its very best to end you at every opportunity. Let's admire it properly first, because it truly is a genuinely spectacular object to behold. The 1950s automobile is enormous, gleaming brightly, and absolutely dripping with chrome trim, all sweeping curves and dramatic tail fins in colors bright enough to be spotted clearly from a considerable distance away. It functions as a rolling public statement of prosperity and boundless optimism, the physical, tangible proof that this particular family has genuinely arrived at success. People love their cars throughout with a genuine and lasting passion, wash them lovingly together as a family on weekends, and regard them, in a very real sense, as full members of the household. And underneath all that undeniable beauty sits a machine with remarkably little genuine interest in keeping anyone seated inside it actually alive. Start with the seat belts, which proves remarkably easy, because there simply are none installed. The very idea of physically restraining passengers is not merely absent from the design, it is actively resented by many, seen by a fair number of drivers as a genuine insult to a properly skilled driver's abilities. A truly good driver, the prevailing thinking goes, simply does not crash in the first place, so why would he possibly need a restraining belt at all? The resulting outcome is a car full of entirely unrestrained human beings hurtling down the open road, held in place by nothing more than sheer hope and their own tight grip on the nearest door handle. The interior itself offers essentially no genuine comfort whatsoever in the event of a crash, only additional hazards throughout. The dashboard presents a solid slab of unforgiving metal, perfectly positioned to meet a passenger's head directly at speed. The steering column functions as a rigid metal spear pointed squarely at the driver's chest, with no give whatsoever, no collapse mechanism, no mercy built in at all. Knobs, sharp edges, and hard, unforgiving surfaces surround every single occupant throughout the cabin. In any serious collision, this beautiful passenger cabin instantly becomes a chamber full of blunt and pointed objects, and the human body trapped inside it has genuinely nowhere safe left to go. Then there is the fuel itself, quietly doing real harm to absolutely everyone nearby regardless of whether they are even riding in the car. The gasoline used throughout this era is leaded, and the resulting exhaust spreads real lead into the surrounding air of every street, every driveway, every busy road across the country. It is not merely the drivers themselves who breathe this in, but also the children playing nearby, the watching neighbors, the entire population living downwind of any busy road. This invisible poisoning continues steadily for years on end, its full and lasting consequences understood only much later on. It stands as a genuine environmental hazard woven directly into the simple, ordinary act of driving to the local store. And then there are the children, riding along inside this particular machine. In the typical family car of the 1950s, kids function essentially as loose cargo throughout the ride. They stand freely on the seats, climb enthusiastically over one another, and roam about entirely freely around the moving vehicle's interior. A particularly favorite spot involves the rear window ledge itself, where a small child can comfortably stretch out and watch the passing world go by, functioning as a kind of living ornament sliding gently around the back of the car with every single turn the driver makes. There are no genuine car seats worthy of the name installed anywhere, no meaningful restraints of any kind, no real rules governing any of it, just children rattling about freely inside a fast-moving metal box hurtling down the highway. Put all of this together, and the family car stands revealed as both a genuine marvel and a genuine menace in perfectly equal measure. A gorgeous, beloved, chrome-plated hazard that the entire family adores completely. It offers real freedom and real social status, and it also collects a real and genuinely terrible toll out on the open roads, a toll that the wider culture largely accepts as simply the reasonable price of getting around town. So you settle the entirely unbelted children carefully into the back seat. Admire the gleaming dashboard that would apparently love nothing more than to meet your own forehead at speed, and turn the key in the ignition. Now, a genuinely dangerous car is one thing entirely on its own. A dangerous car out on the open road, driven by an entire nation with remarkably relaxed traffic rules and a genuine fondness for an afternoon drink, is quite another matter altogether. Since we are already seated comfortably in the car, let's take it out properly onto the open road, where 1950s driving habits combine genuinely big, powerful engines with a remarkably small concern for any resulting consequences. The new highways of this era feel genuinely new and exciting throughout. The posted speed limits remain fairly relaxed, and the general prevailing attitude toward basic road safety runs optimistic to the point of outright denial. Remember that earlier 3-martini business lunch we discussed. A great many people genuinely drive themselves home afterward, and from dinner afterward, and from the evening party that follows that, all with a casual acceptance that would thoroughly horrify any modern police officer today. The cars themselves are fast, the brakes remain fairly mediocre throughout, and the available safety features amount to little more than sincere prayer. Simply getting from one place to another becomes a genuine adventure carrying a real and measurable body count. And yet, everyone involved treats the whole arrangement as perfectly normal, rolling the windows down, lighting up another cigarette, and enjoying the passing breeze on the way to wherever fate happens to be steering them that particular afternoon. Let's start with the roads themselves, which are opening up across the country in a genuinely big and thrilling way throughout this decade. New highways stretch out steadily across the entire nation, wide and fast and absolutely full of promise, actively inviting drivers everywhere to open the throttle and simply go. The automobile and the open road together become a powerful symbol of freedom, of genuine possibility, of the entire modern American dream now set firmly into motion. It proves genuinely exciting throughout. It is also, at the same time, a rapidly growing network of high-speed travel built specifically for machines with fairly poor brakes, operated by drivers with remarkably relaxed personal habits, which amounts to a combination carrying entirely predictable results. The governing rules throughout all of this remain fairly loose in practice. Speed limits, where they formally exist at all, prove remarkably generous and only lightly enforced by local authorities. The car itself proves genuinely powerful, fully capable of real, meaningful speed, and there remains remarkably little standing between an ordinary driver and the strong temptation to use every bit of that available power. Drive fast, pass boldly whenever the opportunity presents itself, trust your own instincts completely, and simply assume that everything will work out fine in the end regardless. The prevailing attitude toward road safety throughout remains one of cheerful, unshakable optimism, a firm faith that a genuinely good driver simply will not have an accident, which conveniently overlooks every single driver who unfortunately does. And then there is the matter of drinking, which cannot simply be skipped past here because it is genuinely everywhere throughout this era. Recall that long, boozy business lunch discussed earlier. The driver walking a little unsteadily back to his parked car at the end of that lunch is fully intending to drive himself home afterward, and nobody around him thinks twice about it. The same pattern holds true for the dinner accompanied by wine, the evening spent at the local bar, the party that ran considerably later than planned. Getting behind the wheel after drinking is simply not treated as the serious taboo it will eventually become in later decades. It is simply how respectable people get themselves home at the end of the evening, a casual, accepted habit engaged in regularly by perfectly upstanding citizens who would be genuinely surprised to be told they had done anything wrong at all. The cars themselves, meanwhile, are doing remarkably little to help the overall situation. They are fast throughout, but their brakes remain fairly unimpressive by any modern standard, requiring long stopping distances and offering drivers remarkably little of the fine control that modern drivers now simply take for granted. Handling proves loose throughout, tires remain fairly basic in construction, and the whole machine proves considerably better suited to going fast than to stopping quickly or steering safely out of sudden trouble. Combine a genuinely powerful engine, fairly weak brakes, a relaxed and confident driver, and quite possibly a few cocktails from lunch, and you arrive at a recipe that the nation's roads end up paying for daily without fail. The safety features that might otherwise soften the resulting consequences are, as we have already seen, largely absent from these vehicles entirely. No seat belts installed anywhere, no protective interior design of any kind, nothing whatsoever engineered to help a human body survive a sudden, violent stop. So when things inevitably go wrong out on these fast new roads, they tend to go quite badly wrong indeed, and the resulting toll in injuries and outright deaths runs genuinely heavy, considerably heavier than any modern driver today would ever be willing to tolerate. Yet somehow it gets absorbed quietly into the ordinary background of daily life, treated as simply an accepted cost of the genuine freedom the automobile provides everyone. What proves most genuinely striking, looking back, is precisely how normal all of this feels to the ordinary people actually living through it at the time. There is no widespread sense of unusual danger present, no genuine public alarm being raised anywhere, just the ordinary daily business of driving fast in fundamentally unsafe cars under fairly loose governing rules, sometimes after having a drink or two, and mostly, somehow, still making it safely home in the end. So you roll the window down, light up another cigarette, rest your elbow casually on the door frame, and cruise off comfortably into the afternoon, trusting the entire precarious arrangement to hold together safely just one more time. Now, when the family finally arrives safely back home, they gather together around the newest and most genuinely hypnotic member of the household, a glowing box that is quietly rewriting the very rhythm of how everyone lives their daily lives. Let's head back inside together and gather around this newest addition to the family, the television set, a glowing box that is steadily and quietly rearranging how everyone lives. Suddenly, dinner gets eaten balanced on a folding tray positioned directly in front of the screen, ordinary conversation replaced almost entirely by the flickering blue light, and a recorded laugh track. The programs themselves are thoroughly wholesome throughout. The accompanying advertisements are genuinely relentless, and both work extremely hard together to tell you precisely how a proper family is supposed to look, act, and shop. Everyone across the country ends up learning to want the exact same things at the exact same time, simply because everyone happens to be watching the very same 3 available channels. It proves genuinely magical in its own way, a window opening onto the entire wider world sitting right there in your own living room. It is also, simultaneously, the single most persuasive salesman ever invited directly into an ordinary home, and it genuinely never, ever stops talking. Let's start with the arrival of the television itself, because it truly represents a genuine sensation throughout the country. The television set makes its way into the American home during these particular years and quickly becomes the glowing centerpiece of the entire household. A heavy wooden cabinet housing a fairly small, flickering screen, around which the whole family carefully arranges its furniture. Owning one becomes a genuine mark of being properly modern, and before long nearly every household has one, all tuning faithfully into the exact same handful of channels at the exact same scheduled hours. It stands as a genuine marvel, a window opening onto news, comedy, drama, and spectacle delivered directly into the living room entirely free of charge, and people are rightly amazed by the whole phenomenon. Then it steadily begins changing how the family actually lives day to day. Dinner, once eaten properly at the table accompanied by real conversation, gradually migrates instead into the living room, balanced carefully on folding trays positioned directly in front of the screen. Evenings that once filled up with genuine conversation, board games, or quiet reading now revolve almost entirely around the evening broadcast schedule instead. Families sit together side by side in the flickering light, all facing the very same direction, watching quietly rather than actually talking to one another. The set itself becomes something close to the hearth of the modern home, warm and genuinely hypnotic, and it quietly rearranges the entire rhythm of every single evening that follows. The programs themselves prove carefully wholesome throughout, and they carry a quiet message tucked underneath all that entertainment. The families depicted on screen are tidy, cheerful, and thoroughly conventional throughout. The father appears wise and steady, the mother appears content in her apron, the children appear well-behaved and are quickly corrected the moment they step out of line. These shows do considerably more than simply entertain. They actively instruct as well, presenting a carefully idealized picture of precisely how a proper family is supposed to look and behave, and quietly inviting every real family watching at home to measure themselves directly against that polished standard. The resulting gap between the flawless television household and the messy, ordinary real one becomes its own quiet, persistent source of pressure throughout the household. But the true engine driving television forward is the advertising itself, and it proves genuinely relentless throughout every broadcast. Between programs and often woven directly within them comes a steady, unbroken stream of commercials, each one polished and persuasive, each one explaining in precise detail exactly what you personally need to buy in order to become happy, properly modern, and genuinely admired by those around you. This represents a form of salesmanship carrying a power never before invited quite so directly into the ordinary home, reaching every single family simultaneously, several times over each evening, night after night without pause. Television does not merely reflect the wider consumer culture we discussed earlier, it actively supercharges that culture, pumping the underlying desire to buy directly into the living room itself. And because everyone across the country happens to be watching the very same handful of channels, everyone ends up being quietly shaped in precisely the same way at precisely the same time. The whole country laughs together at the same jokes, follows along with the same unfolding stories, and craves the exact same products, all on the very same broadcast schedule. It proves to be a genuinely powerful force for a certain kind of shared national unity, a common experience held collectively, and simultaneously a genuinely powerful force for conformity as well, gently pressing millions of families steadily toward the same shared tastes, the same underlying wants, and the same narrow idea of what constitutes the good life. The genuine magic and the quiet menace of it all prove almost impossible to fully separate from one another. Television genuinely does bring the wider world directly into the home. It informs, it delights, and it connects people across enormous distances. It also never once stops selling, never once stops quietly instructing, and never once stops talking, an endlessly persuasive presence permanently installed in the corner of the room. So the family gathers together in that soft blue glow each evening, trays balanced carefully on their knees, absorbing both the programs and the accompanying advertisements in roughly equal measure. Now, for all the outward comfort provided by that glowing box each evening, there proved to be one particular fear it simply could not keep safely out of the house. a fear that arrived reliably every single warm season and quietly emptied out the neighborhood swimming pools. Let's talk honestly about summer. Let's talk about the genuine fear that arrived faithfully each and every summer and quietly emptied entire public swimming pools across the country. Before the vaccine finally arrived, polio represents a genuine and widespread terror, a disease that strikes without any real warning, falling mostly upon children, and capable of leaving its young victims permanently paralyzed or worse. Each new warm season brings with it a fresh wave of parental dread. Parents keep their own children carefully away from large crowds, from public pools, from crowded movie theaters. From anywhere at all this invisible threat might conceivably be lurking. There are entire hospital wards filled with children confined inside large mechanical breathing machines, and haunting images that will stay with an entire generation of anxious mothers and fathers for the rest of their lives. When the vaccine finally does arrive, the resulting relief proves genuinely enormous, and the accompanying gratitude proves entirely real. But for much of this particular decade, summer, which by all rights should represent the season of genuine childhood freedom, instead carries a quiet, persistent undercurrent of fear that no amount of comfortable nostalgia can ever quite fully wash away. To properly understand the underlying fear, you first have to understand just how little anyone could genuinely do about it at the time. Polio struck without any clear or reliable warning whatsoever, and entirely without regard for how genuinely careful a given family happened to be. A perfectly healthy child could be playing happily one day and gravely, seriously ill the very next, and there existed no reliable way whatsoever to prevent it from happening, and no available cure once the disease had firmly taken hold. That underlying sense of genuine helplessness sits right at the very heart of the widespread dread. Parents could not simply keep their own children safe through careful effort or diligent attention alone, because the underlying threat itself remained genuinely invisible, and the available science had not yet caught up enough to stop it. The disease itself tended to surge reliably during the warm summer months, which effectively turned summer, the very season that should rightfully belong entirely to children, into a season instead defined by real anxiety. The very places that meant genuine summer fun for children suddenly became the exact places parents feared most of all. Public swimming pools, so genuinely central to any hot summer afternoon, were widely suspected as sources of infection and frequently avoided altogether or simply closed down entirely. Movie theaters, neighborhood playgrounds, county fairs, anywhere at all that crowds of people gathered together took on a distinct shadow of real risk. Families withdrew noticeably, kept their own children close by at all times, and canceled many of the ordinary pleasures of the season entirely, quietly trading genuine freedom for a fragile, uncertain sense of safety instead. The single most haunting images to emerge from this particular era came directly from the hospital wards themselves. Children whose breathing had been seriously affected by the disease were placed inside large mechanical respirators, enormous cylindrical machines that performed the essential breathing work their own weakened young bodies could no longer manage alone. Entire rows of these machines, with only the children's own heads visibly emerging from one end, became one of the single most defining and genuinely sorrowful images of the entire age. For the parents actually living through this particular era, that image was never some distant, abstract concept. It represented a real and remarkably specific fear concerning their own son or daughter, and it sat there quietly, heavily, behind every single summer that passed. This underlying uncertainty touched practically every family across the country, not merely those households the disease directly reached. Even families the illness never once touched directly lived under its long shadow regardless, absorbing the steady stream of news about various outbreaks, hearing quietly about a neighbor's stricken child, adjusting their entire summer plans around a danger they simply could not see coming. It became a genuinely shared national worry, quiet but entirely constant, running steadily beneath the cheerful surface of the decade like a persistent cold current underneath. No amount of surrounding prosperity or optimism could ever fully cover it over, because it directly threatened the very thing people cared about most deeply of all. And then finally came the genuine turning point, one of the true, unqualified triumphs of this entire age. After years of dedicated research, an effective vaccine was finally developed and successfully rolled out nationwide, and the resulting effect proved genuinely enormous. The pervasive dread that had shadowed every single summer for years finally began steadily to lift. Children could at last be properly protected. The crowded hospital wards gradually began to empty out. The relief that swept across the entire country proved genuinely profound and deeply heartfelt throughout. It stands today as a rare moment of genuinely unambiguous good news arriving from this particular era, and the accompanying gratitude toward the underlying science that made it all possible ran deep, and has proven remarkably lasting ever since. It remains a powerful reminder of precisely what this era's genuine progress could accomplish when it actually worked as intended. But for much of the decade leading up to that eventual relief, the underlying fear simply remained a part of ordinary daily life, an accepted, quiet weight carried faithfully by every parent through every single warm season that passed. Now, let's turn our attention to something considerably lighter in tone, a very different kind of scare altogether, one the watching grown-ups genuinely treated as a serious threat to civilization itself, even though it amounted to little more than a steady beat and an electric guitar. Let's swing back toward something considerably more rebellious now, toward the music that genuinely terrified an entire generation of grown-ups. When rock and roll finally arrives on the scene, the adults of the 1950s react as though civilization itself has come under direct attack. The underlying rhythm is judged far too wild, the accompanying hip movements are judged far too loose, and the whole phenomenon gets loudly declared a genuine threat to the moral fiber of the nation's youth. Records get formally banned outright. Live performances get carefully censored. Stern men deliver stern public speeches warning of the genuine dangers posed by a particularly good beat. Teenagers, quite naturally, adore every single second of it, precisely because their own parents happen to hate it so thoroughly. It represents the very first tremor of a coming generational earthquake, the exact moment this perfectly conforming decade finally produces children who have absolutely no genuine intention of conforming themselves. The watching grown-ups clutch their pearls in horror, and the kids simply reach over and turn the volume up higher still. Let's start with the sound itself, because it genuinely lands like a sudden thunderclap across the whole country. This brand new music proves loud, driving, and absolutely full of raw energy, built firmly on a rhythm that makes people genuinely want to move their bodies, and move in ways their watching parents find deeply alarming. It represents a sharp, decisive break from the smooth, carefully orderly popular music that came directly before it, and it belongs unmistakably and entirely to the young people embracing it. To teenagers everywhere, it feels thrilling, genuinely electric, a sound that finally feels like it truly belongs to them alone. To the watching adults, it registers instead as noise, as chaos, and as a deeply suspicious amount of hip movement on public display. And the adults, it turns out, do not take any of it quietly whatsoever. The reaction pouring in from parents, preachers, and various self-appointed guardians of public decency amounts to genuine alarm, treated throughout with a seriousness that appears almost comical viewed from any real distance today. Sermons get delivered directly against it from church pulpits. Newspaper editorials warn earnestly of the coming corruption of an entire generation of young people. Serious men gathered in serious rooms discuss this particular music as though it constituted a genuine public health crisis, thoroughly convinced that these driving rhythms are steadily loosening the moral fiber of an entire generation and steering the nation's youth firmly toward ruin. The overall response goes well beyond simply stern words. 2. Radio stations across the country flatly refuse to play certain records at all. Live performances get carefully censored, with television cameras specifically instructed to film certain performers only from the waist upward, lest their scandalous hip movements corrupt the watching viewers back at home. Concerts get met with genuine suspicion and are sometimes shut down outright by local authorities. Records get boycotted, publicly condemned, and in certain places even physically destroyed. A truly remarkable amount of adult energy gets poured collectively into containing what amounts, in the end, to little more than some genuinely catchy songs paired with an enthusiastic beat. The teenagers themselves, naturally, respond exactly the way teenagers always eventually do in these situations. The more the watching adults openly hate it, the more the young people involved genuinely love it in return. The surrounding disapproval does absolutely nothing to dampen the music's growing appeal. If anything, it actively supercharges that appeal, transforming a simple set of songs into a genuine badge of personal identity and quiet rebellion. To embrace this particular music becomes a way of declaring openly that you are not simply your parents all over again, that you have no genuine intention of quietly falling into line, that you possess tastes and feelings entirely your own. The mounting panic of the older generation becomes, for the younger generation coming up behind them, very much the entire point of the exercise. And this is precisely where the whole phenomenon becomes about considerably more than simply the music itself. Rock and roll represents the very first clear crack appearing in this decade's otherwise smooth surface of conformity. The first genuine sign that the very children being so carefully raised to fit neatly within the mold have absolutely no real intention of staying inside it. All that accumulated pressure to look the same, act the same, and want the exact same things has, in the end, produced a generation that is beginning, through nothing more than a beat and a guitar, to genuinely push back against it all. This particular music represents the opening tremor of a considerably larger cultural shift still to come, the leading edge of an entire youth culture that will grow steadily louder and considerably bolder throughout the years directly ahead. The watching grown-ups can sense it happening, even if they cannot quite properly name what it is they are sensing, which is precisely why they find themselves so genuinely frightened by the whole thing. They are not, in truth, actually frightened of the music itself. They are frightened instead of what that music genuinely represents, of the independence and quiet defiance humming steadily underneath it. So they clutch their pearls tightly, deliver their stern speeches, and pass their formal bans, and the kids simply turn the volume up regardless and keep right on dancing anyway. Now, this very same generation causing all this delightful trouble spends the greater part of its days somewhere quite specific, in a place carefully designed to press them firmly back into line. Let's step directly into the classroom now. Finally, let's step into the ordinary classroom, where the next generation is being gently but firmly pressed into precisely the same mold as everyone who came directly before them. The typical 1950s schoolroom values order, obedience, and genuinely neat handwriting above nearly everything else imaginable. Discipline throughout remains firmly physical and entirely unquestioned. A misbehaving child can reasonably expect swift, immediate correction that would today land any modern teacher in serious professional trouble. Children are drilled steadily in conformity, taught carefully to sit still, to line up in orderly rows, and to recite on command, and reminded on a regular basis to duck and cover in the event of a sudden atomic emergency. Genuine curiosity remains perfectly fine, so long as it stays neatly confined within the established lines. It amounts, in the end, to an entire education system carefully designed to produce reliable, orderly citizens who will fit tidily into the very same world their own parents originally built. And yet, sitting quietly in those very same neat rows, tapping their feet along to a strictly forbidden beat, are the exact children who will go on to spend the entire coming decade carefully taking that tidy little world apart piece by piece. Let's start with the basic physical shape of the classroom itself, because the shape genuinely says a great deal on its own. Rows of desks arranged in perfectly straight lines, either bolted firmly in place or carefully arranged to all face the front of the room together. Children sit upright throughout, hands folded neatly, eyes forward, speaking only when directly called upon by the teacher. The entire surrounding environment is carefully built around maintaining order and genuine stillness, a quiet, tightly controlled space where the teacher's authority remains fundamentally absolute, and the student's sole job is simply to receive, repeat, and fully comply. Individuality itself is decidedly not the underlying goal here. Uniformity is. The lessons themselves prize neatness and rote memorization considerably above genuine imagination throughout. Handwriting gets drilled with tremendous seriousness, each individual letter formed precisely just so, and any untidy work gets corrected sharply and immediately. Facts get recited aloud from memory. Multiplication tables get carefully memorized. And the single correct answer matters considerably more than any genuinely interesting question ever might. A child who colors noticeably outside the lines, whether literally or in any other sense, gets firmly nudged straight back inside them. The overall aim throughout remains competence paired with conformity, turning out students who can reliably follow given instructions, which happens to be precisely what the wider world awaiting them will expect of them later on. Discipline itself is where any modern visitor would genuinely flinch outright. Physical punishment functions as a normal and fully accepted part of ordinary school life throughout this era. A child who misbehaves can reasonably expect swift, bodily correction delivered without hesitation, and without a great deal of thought given to any lasting consequences. The wooden paddle and the ruler function as entirely ordinary classroom tools throughout. Parents largely approve of this arrangement, trusting their child's teacher's authority completely, and frequently promising even more of the same treatment waiting at home afterward. There exists no real debate about any of it, no meaningful oversight whatsoever, simply the firm, shared understanding that classroom order will be maintained by whatever specific means the teacher happens to see fit at the time. Woven directly into all of this, right alongside the shadow cast by the bomb, come the regular duck and cover exercises. The children drop obediently beneath their desks on command, practicing steadily for a genuine catastrophe with roughly the same routine calm typically reserved for an ordinary fire drill. It proves a genuinely surreal thing to sit with quietly, a room full of children learning their letters carefully in the morning hours and rehearsing for full nuclear war that same afternoon. The truly enormous and the entirely everyday sitting there side by side, both simply part of the very same tidy daily schedule. The entire surrounding system points steadily toward a single, unified goal, producing the reliable, orderly, thoroughly conforming citizens this particular decade genuinely prizes above nearly all else. The school itself functions essentially as a factory built for fitting in, taking in energetic, naturally curious children and gently, firmly shaping them instead to sit still, follow the established rules, and quietly take their assigned place within the well-ordered world their own parents have carefully built for them. It proves genuinely efficient throughout. It proves thoroughly disciplined, and it fully intends to turn out an entire next generation exactly like the one that came directly before it. But here sits the quiet joke this particular decade simply cannot yet see coming. Sitting there in those very same neat rows, obediently practicing their careful handwriting and dutifully ducking beneath their desks on command, are the very same children who will grow up to challenge nearly everything around them. They are already tapping their feet along to that strictly forbidden music hidden underneath their desks. They are steadily absorbing all of this rigid order and beginning, somewhere deep down inside, to genuinely question it. This tidy classroom is, quite unknowingly, raising precisely the generation that will spend the coming years carefully pulling that entire tidy world apart piece by piece. And there proves to be genuinely nothing the wooden paddle or the careful handwriting drill can do to stop any of it from happening. So the children sit obediently in their neat rows, hands folded, eyes forward, perfectly shaped throughout, and yet quietly restless underneath it all, the finished product of a decade that badly wanted everyone around it to match. And that, in the end, represents the great hidden secret of this entire shining decade. Underneath all that outward order and comfort and careful conformity, something was already quietly stirring beneath the surface, patiently waiting for its own moment to finally arrive. So, how exactly was your day spent inside the 1950s? You woke up in a house quietly shedding asbestos fibers into the air around you, carefully painted your face using genuinely questionable chemistry, and ate a breakfast that managed to feed you with one hand while slowly, steadily undoing you with the other. You squeezed yourself into a punishing girdle, choked down a wobbling casserole you did not particularly enjoy, and smoked more or less constantly throughout the day because absolutely everyone around you did exactly the same thing, apparently including your own family doctor. You kept an entire spotless home using genuine poison, drove a beautiful automobile equipped with no seat belts whatsoever, and practiced hiding carefully from the literal end of the world beneath a small wooden school desk. And throughout every single moment of it, you were expected, without exception, to smile warmly the entire time. It proved to be a decade defined by shining surfaces and quiet underlying strain, by gleaming new appliances and carefully buried fears, by a shared dream sold hard to some Americans and closed off entirely to others. And yet the ordinary people who actually lived through it all kept right on going regardless. They raised their own children, tended carefully to their homes, fell genuinely in love according to all those complicated unwritten rules, and built real lives filled with genuine warmth inside a world considerably harder underneath than the cheerful postcards ever fully admitted. They endured the constant pressure to conform, and a number of them quietly began, in their own quiet ways, to push firmly back against it, patiently planting the seeds of everything that would eventually follow in the decades still to come. So tonight, as you settle comfortably into your own soft bed, inside your own home filled with clean air, honest ingredient labels, and a car that would genuinely prefer you survive the trip safely, perhaps spare a gentle thought for them. For the women who quietly ran absolutely everything and were formally thanked for none of it. For those told plainly that the shared dream was never really meant for them, who went on and insisted on it anyway. They were stubborn, they were hopeful, and yes, at times a little bit ridiculous too, and they are the ones who carried us here. The house sits quiet now. The old fear has largely faded, the smoke has finally cleared, and there remains nothing left to do now but properly rest. So close your eyes gently, breathe easy, and let yourself drift off. You made it through. Good night.